The wrench slipped from Amani's oil-stained fingers and clattered against the concrete floor of Brighton Auto Repair. Through the service bay window, she watched Derek Harlan, her manager, her tormentor, literally shove an elderly white woman toward the exit, his face twisted with contempt as the woman's arthritic hands trembled against her walker. The woman was begging, actually begging, saying her brakes were grinding metal on metal, that she could barely afford groceries, that she just needed help getting home safely. And Derek laughed. He actually laughed in her face before turning his back like she was garbage. That's when Amani made the decision that would cost her everything and change thousands of lives forever. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let's dive in. The fluorescent lights in Brighton Auto Repair's service bay flickered with the same tired rhythm they'd maintained for the past decade, inconsistent, unreliable, barely functional. Amani Brooks had learned to work beneath their sporadic glow, her dark hands moving with practiced precision through shadows and sudden brightness, adjusting her movements to compensate for equipment the company was too cheap to replace. It was 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday in late October, and the autumn air carried that particular kind of cold that seeps through metal garage doors and settles in your bones. Amani had been under the hood of a 2015 Honda Accord for the past 90 minutes, her shoulders aching from the angle, her fingers raw despite her work gloves. The diagnostic scanner she'd borrowed from Marcus, the only other mechanic who'd give her the time of day, sat propped against the front tire, its screen displaying a cascade of error codes that told the story of years of neglected maintenance. She was 26 years old, had been working at Brighton for 14 months, and had been invisible for every single one of them. "Brooks," Derek Harlan's voice cut through the mechanical symphony of air tools and idling engines like a serrated blade. "You done with that Accord yet? We got paying customers waiting." Amani didn't look up. She'd learned that looking up only invited more scrutiny, more criticism, more of Derek's particular brand of management that seemed designed specifically to remind her that she didn't belong. Instead, she kept her eyes on the serpentine belt she was inspecting, checking for the cracks she knew she'd find. 20 more minutes, she called back, her voice steady despite the knot tightening in her stomach. The alternators shot, and somebody tried to jump-start it so many times they fried the, "I didn't ask for your life story, Brooks. I asked if you were done." Derek's footsteps approached, heavy boots on stained concrete. She could smell him before she saw him. Cigarettes and the cheap cologne he apparently believed made him irresistible to the female customers he hit on with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. "We got real work backing up while you play detective under there." Amani straightened slowly, pulling herself out from under the hood. Derek stood 3 feet away, his arms crossed over his Brighton Auto Repair polo shirt, the one he never actually worked in, preferring to patrol the shop like a warden while everyone else broke their backs. He was 42, carried an extra 60 pounds around his midsection that he blamed on his ex-wife's cooking, and had the kind of face that seemed permanently arranged in an expression of barely contained irritation. Behind him, she could see the waiting area through the service bay door. Mrs. Chen sat with her daughter, both of them looking anxious. The businessman whose BMW was up on the lift kept checking his Rolex. And in the corner, barely visible through the crowd, sat an elderly woman with silver white hair and a walker, her thin shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. "The alternator needs replacing," Amani said evenly, wiping her hands on the red shop rag tucked into her belt. "It's going to be another hour minimum. I can show you the diagnostic." "What you can do," Derek interrupted, stepping closer, always invading space like it was his right, "is stop trying to upsell every customer who comes through that door. The work order says oil change and tire rotation. That's what we're billing for. Understood?" The knot in Amani's stomach pulled tighter. She'd had this conversation before, or versions of it. Derek had a policy he called stick to the ticket. Do exactly what the customer paid for up front, nothing more, and definitely don't go looking for problems that might require expensive repairs. It didn't matter that the alternator was failing. It didn't matter that Mrs. Chen's daughter had mentioned her mother's car had been making weird noises. It didn't matter that finding problems before they became catastrophic failures was literally the definition of good mechanical work. What mattered was speed, throughput. processing customers like products on an assembly line, collecting payment, and moving to the next one before anyone had time to think too hard about whether they were actually getting their car fixed or just getting their wallet lightened. Derek, that alternator's going to fail completely, probably within the next few days, Amani tried again, keeping her voice low, reasonable. If I don't tell them now, then they'll come back and we'll charge them again. Derek's smile was ugly, all teeth and no warmth. That's called repeat business, Brooks. Maybe they didn't teach you that in whatever community college program you barely finished, but that's how the real world works. The words landed like they were designed to, precise strikes meant to remind her of her place, her background, her lack of pedigree in a field dominated by men who'd inherited their expertise from fathers and grandfathers who'd never had to prove they belonged. Amani had graduated top of her class from Morrison Technical Institute, had certifications Derek couldn't name, let alone earn, had rebuilt her first transmission at 16 in her uncle's garage, while Derek was probably figuring out how to fail upward into management. None of it mattered. Not here. Not to him. Understood, she said quietly, and watched his smile widen at her capitulation. Good. Now finish that oil change and move on. We're not running a charity. He turned away, dismissing her with the gesture, but paused. Oh, and Brooks? You're closing tonight. Marcus called in, so you're covering. Hope you didn't have plans. He didn't wait for a response. He never did. Amani watched him walk away, his swagger exaggerated, performing authority for anyone who might be watching. Through the service bay door, she saw him approach the businessman with the BMW, his entire demeanor transforming, suddenly deferential, apologetic, professional. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the body language. The customer was important. The customer mattered. The customer would be taken care of. The elderly woman in the corner hadn't moved. She was still there, still waiting, so motionless she might have been invisible. Amani turned back to the Accord, her jaw tight. She replaced the oil filter, torqued the drain plug, lowered the car, and finished the tire rotation in mechanical silence, her mind elsewhere. The work came automatically after years of practice. Check, tighten, verify, move to the next step. Muscle memory allowing her consciousness to drift. She was thinking about the eviction notice taped to her apartment door. Thinking about her brother Terrence, who needed $200 for textbooks before the semester dropped him for non-payment. Thinking about the $43.27 in her checking account and the paycheck that wouldn't arrive for another week. Thinking about the alternator she wasn't allowed to fix and the elderly woman still waiting in the corner and the systematic way Derek seemed to find new methods to make her feel small. By the time she finished with the Accord, the waiting area had thinned. Mrs. Chen and her daughter had been taken care of. Oil change only, per Derek's instructions. The weird noises dismissed as probably just normal engine sounds. The businessman had retrieved his BMW, placated by Derek's obsequious attention and a discount Amani knew would somehow be deducted from her commission. The evening shift was arriving, Paolo on tire rotation, Big Mike on brake jobs, both of them nodding at her in silent solidarity as they clocked in. The elderly woman was still there. Amani watched through the service bay window as Derek finally approached her, his body language already broadcasting irritation. She couldn't hear the initial exchange, but she didn't need to. She'd seen this performance before. Derek dealing with customers he'd already decided weren't worth his time. The elderly, the poor, anyone who looked like they might question a bill or ask for a discount or otherwise interrupt the smooth efficiency of extracting maximum profit for minimum effort. The woman was speaking, her head tilted up to look at Derek despite the obvious pain it caused her arthritic neck. Her hands clutched the walker with white-knuckled desperation, and even from this distance, Amani could see they were shaking. The woman gestured toward the parking lot, where an ancient Toyota Corolla sat with its front end facing the service bay. The car looked older than Amani, its paint oxidized to a dull gray-green, one headlight held in place with what appeared to be duct tape. Derek's response was visible in every line of his body, the dismissive wave, the backward step, the way he checked his phone like the conversation was already over. The woman kept talking, kept trying, her desperation growing more visible with each word. She reached out, her trembling hand almost touching Derek's arm in a plea for attention, for help, for basic human acknowledgement. Derek jerked away like she'd tried to strike him, his face twisted, that particular expression of outraged disgust that some people reserve for moments when they believe someone beneath them has forgotten their place. He pointed toward the exit, his meaning unmistakable. "Get out!" The woman's shoulders curled further inward. She seemed to shrink, to fold into herself as if his rejection had physical weight. She was crying now, Amani realized, silent tears tracking down weathered cheeks, catching the fluorescent light. The woman said something else, one last attempt, but Derek had already turned his back. He actually turned his back on a crying elderly woman. Amani found herself moving before the conscious decision registered. She set down her tools, stripped off her gloves, and walked toward the waiting area entrance. Behind her, she heard Paolo call out, "Brooks, you good?" But she didn't answer. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears, drowning out caution, drowning out the voice that sounded suspiciously like her mother warning her to keep her head down. Don't make waves, don't give them reasons. The automatic door slid open as she approached. The waiting area was standard corporate design, uncomfortable chairs screwed to the floor, a TV playing muted sports highlights, laminated posters advertising services at prices that always seemed to mysteriously increase at checkout. The elderly woman had made it halfway to the exit before stopping, her walker providing support as she stood motionless, her thin frame shaking with more than just age. "Ma'am?" Amani kept her voice gentle, approaching slowly like she might with a frightened animal. "Ma'am, are you all right?" The woman turned, and Amani saw her face clearly for the first time. She was probably in her late 70s, with skin like crumpled tissue paper and eyes that carried that particular shade of blue that seems to fade with age. Those eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but there was something else there too, humiliation so profound it hurt to witness. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I'll go. I'm sorry." "You're not bothering me." Amani glanced toward the service bay where Derek had disappeared into his office. "What's wrong with your car?" The woman, later Amani would learn her name was Mabel Rowan, but in this moment she was just an elderly stranger in obvious distress, looked at Amani like she couldn't quite believe the question was genuine, like she'd been dismissed so many times that day, that week, that year, that kindness had become suspect. "The brakes," Mabel said finally, her voice strengthening slightly. "The brakes are making a terrible sound, like metal scraping metal. And yesterday I pressed the pedal and it went almost to the floor before the car stopped. Her voice broke. "I almost hit another car. I'm terrified to drive it, but I need to get home, and I can't afford a tow truck." And the man said, "Derek," Amani supplied, and was rewarded with a small nod. "He said they're too busy with important customers, that I should have called ahead for an appointment, that he can't help people who show up expecting miracles." Mabel's fingers tightened on her walker. "I did call ahead, 3 days ago. They told me to come in today at 4, but when I got here he said there's no record of any appointment and that I was," the words seemed to hurt coming out, "that I was trying to scam my way into free service." Rage, bright and clean, flooded through Amani's chest. She knew Derek's game. She'd seen him play it before. The lost appointments, always with customers who looked like they couldn't afford to push back. The accusations of trying to get free work, designed to shame people into leaving rather than causing a scene. The systematic cruelty of a man who'd learned he could wield small power over vulnerable people with zero consequences. "Your brakes are metal on metal?" Amani asked, already knowing the answer. "I think so. It sounds awful. And I'm so tired of being afraid every time I press the pedal." Mabel's eyes filled again. "I'm 78 years old. I worked for 40 years as a nurse. I paid my taxes, raised my children, buried my husband, and I can't..." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't even get someone to look at my brakes without being treated like I'm begging for charity." Something crystallized in that moment for Imani. She thought about the eviction notice, thought about Terrence's textbooks, thought about her own desperation and fear and the way Derek's cruelty had been chipping away at her dignity for 14 months, thought about all the time she'd kept her head down, followed orders, swallowed her anger because she needed this job, needed the paycheck, couldn't afford to make waves. And then she thought, what's the point of keeping a job that requires you to watch people suffer when you have the skills to help? "Come on," Imani said, offering her arm to steady Mabel. "Let's go look at your car." Mabel's eyes widened. But he said, I know what he said. I'm saying something different. Amani guided Mabel toward the exit, moving slowly to match her pace. I'm saying let's go look at your brakes. But won't you get in trouble? Amani thought about the eviction notice, the empty checking account, the 1,000 ways this could go wrong. Probably, she said honestly, but your brakes are dangerous and I know how to fix them, so let's go figure out how bad it is. They made their way across the parking lot, Mabel's walker clicking against the asphalt, Amani matching her slow pace. The October evening was settling into darkness, the streetlights flickering to life one by one. In the distance, traffic hummed on the interstate, people going home, going about their lives, unaware of the small drama unfolding in an auto repair parking lot. Mabel's Corolla looked even worse up close. The paint was peeling in sheets, revealing rust beneath. The passenger side mirror was held on with wire. The inspection sticker was 8 months expired. This was the car of someone living on the absolute edge, making impossible choices between car maintenance and groceries, between safety and survival. Keys? Amani asked, and Mabel handed them over with trembling fingers. Amani slid into the driver's seat, cracked vinyl, a smell like dust and worry, and started the engine. It caught on the second try, running rough, the dashboard lighting up like a Christmas tree of warning lights. She pressed the brake pedal experimentally. It went halfway to the floor before meeting resistance. She pressed harder. The pedal sank further. Oh, hell, Imani breathed. She put the car in drive, crept forward 3 feet in the parking lot, and hit the brakes again. The car shuddered to a stop, and the sound that accompanied it was unmistakable, the tortured shriek of metal grinding directly against metal, with nothing but air where brake pads should be. This car shouldn't be on the road. This car was a mobile disaster waiting to happen. Mabel could pump the brakes at a red light and roll straight into an intersection. Could come down a hill and discover the brakes had finally failed completely. Could kill herself or someone else because the basic maintenance she couldn't afford had become a critical safety failure. Amani shut off the engine and climbed out. Mabel stood beside her walker, reading Amani's expression with the accuracy of someone who'd spent a lifetime learning to interpret bad news delivered by professionals. It's bad, isn't it? Mabel said quietly. It wasn't a question. It's bad, Amani confirmed. She knelt beside the front wheel, peering through the spokes. Even without removing the wheel, she could see the problem. The brake pads weren't just worn. They were gone. Completely gone. The caliper was grinding directly against the rotor, scoring deep grooves into the metal. Ma'am, I'm surprised you made it here. These brakes should have failed already. Mabel's face crumpled. I can't afford. I have maybe $40 until my Social Security check comes in next week. I know it's not enough. I know I'm asking for. She stopped, swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll figure something out. Imani looked at this elderly woman who'd worked her entire life, who'd done everything right, who was apologizing for having the audacity to need help she couldn't afford. She thought about her own $43 out of $27, thought about Terrence's textbooks and her eviction notice and every good reason why she should walk away, clock out, go home. Then she thought about the metal-on-metal screech and what it would sound like if Mabel's brakes failed at 60 miles per hour on the interstate. Pop your trunk, Imani said, straightening up. What? Pop your trunk. I need to get your spare tire out to access the jack points. Mabel stared at her. You're going to fix it? I'm going to look at it, Imani corrected. If it's just the pads and rotors, yeah, I can fix it. If the calipers are damaged or the brake lines are compromised, it's going to be more complicated. But either way, you're not driving this car home with the brakes in this condition. But I can't pay. I heard you. $40 until next week. We'll figure it out. Imani pulled her phone from her pocket and checked the time. 5:43 p.m. Derek would be in his office doing paperwork for another hour at least, and then he'd head out, leaving her to close up. If she was quick, if she was quiet, she could pull Mabel's car into the service bay and handle this without him noticing until it was done. It was risky. It was probably stupid. It definitely violated every policy Derek had spent 14 months drilling into her head. But looking at Mabel's face, at the hope and disbelief and desperate gratitude warring in those faded blue eyes, Imani knew she was going to do it anyway. Come on, she said, guiding Mabel back toward the waiting area. This is going to take a couple hours. There's coffee in the waiting room. It's terrible, but it's hot. And there's a bathroom. Get comfortable, and I'll come get you when I'm done. I don't understand, Mabel whispered. Why are you helping me? Amani thought about her mother, who'd cleaned houses for 30 years and raised 3 kids on poverty wages, and taught them that dignity didn't come from how much money you had, but from how you treated people when you had the power to help or hurt. Thought about Uncle Ray, who'd taught her everything he knew about engines and told her the best mechanics were the ones who remembered that cars mattered because people needed them to get to work, to get to doctors, to get their kids to school. Because your brakes are dangerous, Amani said simply. And I know how to fix them. That's reason enough. She got Mabel settled in the waiting area with a cup of terrible coffee and a promise to check on her in an hour. Then she returned to the parking lot, climbed into the Corolla, and very carefully, because the brakes were garbage, maneuvered it toward the service bay entrance. Paolo intercepted her halfway there. Brooks, what are you doing? Emergency brake job, Amani said, not quite meeting his eyes. Derek approved it? Derek doesn't need to know about it. Paolo's eyes widened. Girl, you're going to get fired. Probably, Amani agreed, and was surprised to find she'd already accepted that outcome. There was something almost liberating about it. The freedom that came with knowing the worst was probably going to happen, so you might as well do the right thing in the meantime. Can you help me get it up on the lift? Paolo looked at the Corolla, at the service bay where Derek's office light was still on, at Imani's determined face. Then he sighed the deep sigh of a man who knew he was about to make a bad decision and couldn't quite bring himself to care. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'll help, but when Derek loses his mind, I'm throwing you straight under the bus. Fair enough. They got the Corolla positioned under the lift in Service Bay 3, the one furthest from Derek's office, where the security camera had been broken for 6 months. Amani hit the lift button and watched the ancient Toyota rise into the air, its undercarriage revealing years of deferred maintenance, rust, and jury-rigged repairs. This car was held together by determination and prayer. With the car elevated, the brake situation became even clearer. All 4 wheels needed attention, but the fronts were critical. The pads were gone, the rotors were scored deeply enough that they couldn't be resurfaced, and the calipers were seizing from heat damage. It was a complete front brake job, parts and labor, the kind of repair that would normally cost $600, $800, depending on parts quality and shop rates. Mabel had $40. Amani pulled out her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice suspicious. Brooks, I'm off tonight. I'm not covering. I know. I need a favor. That kind of favor that gets me in trouble with Derek? Probably. You still have those front brake pads and rotors from the Corolla you parted out last month? Silence. Then, the ones I was planning to sell to Discount Auto for $40? Yeah, those. I need them. Tonight. Brooks? There's an elderly woman in the waiting room whose brakes are gone. Metal on metal. She has $40 to her name and a Social Security check that won't arrive for another week. If she drives this car home, she's going to die or kill someone else. More silence. Then Marcus said, You're doing this without Derek knowing. Yep. You're going to get fired. Probably. And you're asking me to give you $40 worth of parts so you can fix this for free. Yep. She heard him exhale, long and slow. Marcus was 53, had worked at Brighton for 8 years, had 2 ex-wives and 3 kids, and understood exactly how precarious their positions were in Derek's empire of controlled chaos. He had every reason to say no. I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, and hung up. Amani felt something loosen in her chest, gratitude, relief, the knowledge that she wasn't alone in this small rebellion. She returned to the Corolla and started disassembling the front brakes, her hands moving through familiar motions. Remove the wheel. Remove the caliper. Remove the destroyed pads. Inspect the damage. It was worse than she'd thought. The rotors were beyond salvaging, warped from heat, scored so deeply they'd never be safe. The calipers needed rebuilding, but that would take time she didn't have. She'd work with what Marcus brought, do the best she could, and pray it was enough to get Mabel home safely. Paolo kept watch, doing his own work on a tire rotation, but positioned where he could see Derek's office. Big Mike, catching on to the situation, moved his brake job to the service bay next to Amani's, creating a buffer of activity that might disguise what she was doing. The camaraderie was unspoken but absolute. They were all mechanics who'd been underpaid, overworked, and casually disrespected by management. They'd all watched Derek treat customers like transactions, and employees like disposable equipment. None of them could afford to take the risks Amani was taking, but they could provide cover. And in the carefully balanced ecosystem of workplace survival, sometimes that was everything. Marcus arrived at 6:15 p.m. with the parts in a plastic shopping bag, brake pads still in their boxes, rotors wrapped in old newspaper. He handed them over without ceremony. "You're insane," he told Amani. "I know. This is going to end badly. I know. When Derek finds out, and he will find out, he's going to make your life hell." "He already does," Amani pointed out. "At least this way, somebody's brakes get fixed." Marcus shook his head but didn't argue. He stood there for a moment, watching her work, then said quietly, "My mom died 3 years ago. Her car broke down on the interstate in July. She called for help, but she couldn't afford a tow, and she couldn't afford the repairs. So she tried to drive it to a cheaper mechanic, made it about 6 miles before the engine seized completely. She sat on the side of the road in 100-degree heat for 4 hours before someone stopped, ended up in the hospital with heat stroke, never really recovered." Amani looked up from the rotor she was removing. Marcus's face was carefully neutral, the expression of someone who'd learned to pack grief away where it couldn't interfere with daily survival. "I'm sorry," she said. "Yeah, me too." He handed her a torque wrench. "Make sure those lug nuts are tight. If that woman's brakes fail because you rushed the job, you're not helping her. You're just creating a different kind of danger." "I know." "Good." He headed toward the exit, then paused. "Brooks, when Derek fires you, and he will, you call me. I got a buddy who runs an independent shop across town. They're always looking for good mechanics. Pay's not great, but at least the owner's not a complete bastard." Then he was gone, leaving Amani alone with the parts and the knowledge that she wasn't just risking her job. She was burning it down in real time, in front of witnesses, without any guarantee that another opportunity would materialize. She kept working. The brake job was methodical, precise, demanding her complete attention. Clean the hub surface, mount the new rotor, rebuild the caliper with the limited materials available, install the new pads, check clearances, verify the brake lines. Everything by the book, everything double-checked. Because Marcus was right. A rushed brake job was potentially more dangerous than no brake job at all. At 7:30 p.m., Derek emerged from his office. Amani heard his footsteps before she saw him, that distinctive heavy tread. She was torquing the last lug nut on the passenger side when his voice cut through the shop. "Brooks, what the hell is that car doing in here?" She straightened slowly, wiping her hands on her shop rag. Derek stood 15 feet away, his face already flushing red, his eyes locked on the ancient Corolla. Behind him, Paolo and Big Mike had both gone very still, their body language screaming, "Don't look at me." "Emergency brake job," Amani said calmly. "Customers' brakes were metal on metal. Safety issue." "I don't remember approving any emergency brake job." Derek approached, his voice rising with each step. "I remember telling you we're not running a charity. I remember specifically kicking that old woman out because she didn't have an appointment and couldn't pay." "That's correct," Amani agreed. "You did tell her that. Right before you suggested she was trying to scam free service." Derek's face went from red to purple. "Are you giving me attitude right now?" "No, sir. I'm stating facts. The customer's brakes were dangerous. She could have killed herself or someone else. I had the time and the skills to fix the problem, so I did." "You had—" Derek seemed to choke on his own rage. "You had the time? You work for me, Brooks. I decide how you spend your time. I decide which customers we help. And I sure as hell didn't authorize you to waste shop resources on some broke old lady who can't pay her bill." Amani felt that curious calm that sometimes comes in moments of crisis, the clarity that emerges when you've already accepted the worst outcome and stopped caring about protecting yourself. With respect, Derek, she's not some broke old lady. She's a former nurse who worked 40 years and paid her taxes and shouldn't have to choose between eating and having safe brakes. "Oh, with respect,"
Derek's laugh was ugly. You hear that, guys? Brooks is giving me her opinion with respect. Tell me, Brooks, when did you become the manager here? When did you start making decisions about shop policy? I didn't. I just fixed an elderly woman's brakes so she wouldn't die on the way home.
No, what you did was violate about 6 different company policies, waste shop time on unauthorized work, and make me look like an asshole in front of a customer I already dismissed. Derek stepped closer, invading her space the way he always did when he wanted to intimidate. You're done here, Brooks. Get your stuff and get out. The words hung in the air between them. Paolo inhaled sharply. Big Mike found something fascinating on the floor. The shop had gone silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic. Amani looked at Derek, at his red face and mean eyes, and the petty cruelty that had probably been eating away at his soul for years, and felt something unexpected. Pity. This was his power. This was what he'd built his life around. The ability to hurt vulnerable people and fire employees who didn't follow his orders without question. Okay, Amani said quietly. Let me finish torquing these lug nuts so the wheel doesn't fall off, and I'll go.
Now, Derek snapped. You'll go right now. I'll finish the job myself. You don't know how to get out. Amani set down the torque wrench carefully. She walked to her toolbox, the rolling red cart she'd bought with her first paycheck, filled with tools she'd accumulated over years, and started loading her personal equipment. The shop was still silent, everyone carefully not watching the spectacle of her firing. She was halfway done when she heard movement in the doorway, turned. Mabel stood there, leaning on her walker, her face pale but her expression resolute. Young man, Mabel said, her voice carrying surprising strength. I'd like to pay for the work being done on my car. Derek spun to face her. Ma'am, I already told you we're not. I have $40, Mabel interrupted, pulling crumpled bills from her cardigan pocket. I know it's not enough for the full repair, but I'd like to pay what I can. And I'd like this young woman to finish the work she started, because she's the only person here who's treated me like a human being. Derek's expression cycled through several emotions, irritation, calculation, and finally a kind of cruel satisfaction. You want to pay $40 for a brake job that costs $700? That's cute. Tell you what, you can take your $40 and your heap of junk and get off my property. We don't accept partial payments and we don't do charity work. You want brakes? Go to a real shop with real money. Mabel didn't flinch. She just stood there, still holding out the crumpled bills, her hands still shaking but her dignity intact. I see. Then I suppose I'll need to speak with the owner of this establishment about the quality of service and the treatment of paying customers. Derek laughed, that ugly, dismissive sound. Lady, I am the manager. I speak for the owner. And right now I'm telling you to leave, or I'm calling the cops to remove you for trespassing. That won't be necessary, Mabel said quietly. She tucked the money back into her pocket, carefully folded it away. Then she looked at Amani. I'm sorry you lost your job trying to help me. Don't be, Amani said, surprised to find she meant it. I'm not sorry. Your brakes are mostly done. Someone here can finish them. And you, she looked directly at Derek. You drive carefully until you get those lug nuts torqued properly. If you don't know the proper sequence or tension, ask Paolo. Because if you half-ass it and that wheel comes off, you're not just looking at a lawsuit. You're looking at someone's blood on your hands. Are you threatening me? Derek's voice went dangerously quiet. I'm informing you of basic mechanical safety, Amani corrected. But take it however you want. I don't work here anymore, so it's not my problem. She finished loading her tools, her personal supplies, the photograph of her and Terrence she'd taped inside her toolbox lid. The shop was still silent, everyone frozen in this tableau of workplace disaster. When her toolbox was packed, Amani closed it, locked the latches, and pulled it toward the exit. She paused beside Mabel. There's a place called Rodriguez Auto on 5th Street. Tell them Marcus sent you. They're good people, and they'll work with you on payment. Thank you, Mabel whispered. Then louder. What's your name? Amani Brooks. Thank you, Amani Brooks. I won't forget what you did tonight. Amani nodded, not trusting her voice, and headed for the exit. Behind her, she heard Derek already moving on, already dismissing her from his thoughts. Paulo, finish that brake job. I want that piece of junk out of here in 20 minutes. And nobody pulls this kind of stunt again, or you're all gone.
Clear? A murmured chorus of "Yes, sir" followed Amani into the parking lot. The October night was cold now, the temperature dropping fast. Amani loaded her toolbox into the trunk of her 2003 Honda Civic. 12 years old, 180,000 miles, but mechanically sound because she maintained it obsessively. She sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, her hands on the steering wheel, processing what had just happened. She'd been fired. Actually fired. For the first time in her life, she'd lost a job. And not because she'd messed up or failed to perform, but because she'd helped someone who needed it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Heard what happened. Job offer still stands. Call my buddy tomorrow. Then Paulo. You got balls, Brooks. Respect. Then, unexpectedly, Big Mike. That was the right thing. Don't regret it. Amani stared at her phone, feeling the tightness in her chest begin to ease. She'd lost her job. She still had the eviction notice waiting at home. She still had $43, $27 in her checking account, and a brother who needed textbook money and no clear path forward. But she'd fixed Mabel's brakes. She'd done the right thing, and somehow, impossibly, that felt like enough. She started her car and headed home, unaware that in the Brighton auto repair waiting room, Mabel Rowan was pulling out her phone. Unaware that she was scrolling through contacts until she found the one she wanted. Unaware that she was pressing call and waiting through 3 rings until a familiar voice answered. Hi, Mom. Everything okay? Graham, Mabel said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. Graham, I need to tell you what just happened at your company, and then I need you to tell me if this is really how you want your father's legacy remembered. There was a long pause. Then, Mom, what are you talking about? What happened? Mabel looked through the service bay window where Derek was supervising Paulo's work with his characteristic impatience, already back to his routine, already confident in his authority, completely unaware that he'd just made the worst mistake of his career. I'll explain everything, Mabel said, but first I need you to tell me, do you still have access to the security footage from all the Brighton locations? Another pause, longer this time, waited with sudden attention. Yes. Mom, what's going on? Just tell me you can access the footage. Tell me you can see what happened here tonight. I can. Mom, you're scaring me. Are you safe? I'm safe, Mabel assured him. But there's a young woman named Amani Brooks who just lost her job at your company for doing exactly what your father would have done. And there's a manager named Derek Harlan who just revealed exactly who he is and how he treats people. And I think, her voice hardened with something that transcended grief, transcended her 78 years, connected directly to the fierce protectiveness that had carried her through 4 decades of nursing and motherhood. I think it's time you remembered why your father started this company in the first place. The silence on the other end of the line stretched. Then Graham Rowan, CEO of Brighton Auto Repair's parent company, said quietly, "Tell me everything." And in the parking lot, pulling onto the interstate, completely unaware that her small act of rebellion had just set much larger wheels in motion, Amani Brooks drove home through the cold October night, her toolbox rattling in the trunk, wondering how she was going to pay next month's rent and completely unprepared for what was about to happen next. The apartment Amani returned to that night was a study in careful survival, a 1-bedroom in a converted building where the radiators clanked all winter but never quite produced enough heat, where the hallway smelled perpetually of someone else's cooking and disappointment, where the walls were thin enough that she'd learned her neighbors' schedules by the sound of their footsteps. She'd lived here for 2 years, ever since Uncle Ray had died and left her with nothing but his tools and the mechanical knowledge he'd spent a lifetime accumulating. The eviction notice was still taped to her door, a bright orange violation against the chipped green paint, official and impersonal in its threat. She pulled it down as she unlocked the deadbolt, carrying it inside with her toolbox like twin symbols of everything collapsing simultaneously. The notice gave her 14 days. That had been posted 6 days ago. 8 days remaining until the sheriff could legally remove her belongings to the curb. 8 days, and now no job. She set the toolbox against the wall beside her dying couch, a thrift store rescue with cushions that had given up their shape years ago, and dropped onto it heavily. The springs protested. Through the wall, she could hear her neighbor's television, some game show where people screamed their joy at winning prizes while she sat in the dark contemplating financial disaster. Her phone buzzed. Terrence, her younger brother, his timing impeccable as always. "Hey," she answered, too tired to inject false cheerfulness into her voice. "Sis, I hate to ask, but did you get a chance to—" Terrence stopped. Even through the phone, he could apparently read her silence. "What happened?" "I got fired." "You— what? What did you do?" Despite everything, Amani almost laughed. "I fixed an old lady's brakes. That seems like the opposite of something you'd get fired for." "Derek didn't approve it. She couldn't pay. I did it anyway." Amani leaned her head back against the couch, staring at the water stain on her ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of somewhere she'd never been. "He fired me on the spot." Terrence was quiet for a long moment. Her brother was 23, finishing his engineering degree at State, working 2 part-time jobs and still struggling to cover books and fees because their mother's disability payments barely kept her housed 3 states away. He was brilliant and exhausted and carrying the weight of being the family's only real hope for upward mobility. "The textbook money," he said quietly. "Forget it. I'll figure something else out." "T, you need those books. The semester will drop you. And you need to keep a roof over your head. Sis, I'll work extra shifts. I'll talk to financial aid again. I'll figure it out. You've been carrying us long enough." The words hit harder than they should have. Amani blinked against unexpected tears, grateful he couldn't see her face. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize for helping someone who needed it. That's literally the most you thing you've ever done." He paused. "Mom would be proud. Uncle Ray would be proud. Uncle Ray would tell me I was an idiot for not thinking strategically. Uncle Ray would tell you that, then he'd buy you a beer and help you find another job." Terrence's voice softened. "You're going to be okay. You're the smartest mechanic I know. I'm the only mechanic you know. Doesn't make it less true. Listen, I gotta get to my shift, but text me tomorrow, okay? We'll figure this out." After they hung up, Amani sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the radiator clank and the neighbors argue and the city breathing around her. She thought about pulling up her laptop and starting the job search, but exhaustion pinned her to the couch like gravity had suddenly intensified. Instead, she closed her eyes and tried not to calculate how many days of unemployment she could survive before homelessness became reality. She was nearly asleep when her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her thumb the accept button. "Amani Brooks?" A woman's voice, older, with the careful pronunciation of someone who'd spent years in professional settings. "Speaking. My name is Carolyn Martinez. I'm the Director of Human Resources for Rowan Automotive Group, the parent company of Brighton Auto Repair. I'm calling regarding an incident that occurred at the Brighton location this evening." Amani sat up straight, sleep evaporating. Her mind raced through possibilities, all of them bad. Derek had reported her for theft. Derek had claimed she'd damaged property. Derek had somehow escalated this beyond a simple firing into legal territory. "Okay," she said carefully. "What kind of incident?" "The incident where you were terminated for providing emergency brake service to a customer in need." There was something in Carolyn's tone, not quite warmth, but not the corporate coldness Amani had been expecting either. "Ms. Brooks, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer honestly. Can you do that?" "I can try." "Did manager Derek Harlan instruct you not to service Mabel Rowan's vehicle?" The use of Mabel's full name made something click in Amani's mind, but she couldn't quite grasp what it meant. "Yes, ma'am. He told me we don't do charity work and that he'd already dismissed the customer." "And you proceeded with the repair anyway?" "Yes, ma'am. The customer's brakes were dangerous, metal on metal, with the pedal going almost to the floor. I assessed it as an immediate safety hazard." "Did you complete the repair?" "Most of it. I was torquing the last lug nut when Derek stopped me and fired me. I told him the proper torque sequence before I left, and I informed the customer, Mrs. Rowan, about Rodriguez Auto on 5th Street as an alternative." She heard the sound of typing, Carolyn making notes. "Did manager Harlan at any time during this incident make statements about the customer's financial situation, age,
or perceived value to the company. Amani's throat tightened. This felt like walking through a minefield where the wrong word could detonate consequences she couldn't anticipate. He called her some broke old lady. He said we don't waste shop resources on customers who can't pay their bills. He accused her of trying to scam free service when she mentioned calling for an appointment. More typing. The silence stretched long enough that Amani wondered if the call had dropped. Ms. Brooks, I need you to not discuss this incident with anyone for the next 72 hours. Can you do that? Yes, but can I ask why? You can ask, I can't answer yet. Answer. Carolyn's voice softened slightly. But I can tell you that you're not in trouble. Your actions are being reviewed, but not in the way you might think. Do you have a lawyer? A lawyer? No, I can't afford. You won't need one, but you may want to keep your phone charged and your schedule clear. Someone will be in contact within the next few days. A pause. Miss Brooks, one more question. When you made the decision to repair Mrs. Rowan's brakes against direct orders, knowing you would likely be fired, what were you thinking? Amani closed her eyes, remembering Mabel's shaking hands and the metal-on-metal screech and the look on Derek's face when he'd turned his back on a crying elderly woman. I was thinking that keeping my job wasn't worth watching someone die because they couldn't afford basic car maintenance. I was thinking Uncle Ray would be ashamed of me if I walked away. I was thinking... She stopped, surprised by the emotion in her voice.
I was thinking that if I'm going to lose everything anyway, I might as well lose it doing something right.
Thank you for your honesty. Carolyn's voice carried something that might have been approval. 72 hours, Ms. Brooks. Keep your phone charged. The call ended, leaving Amani staring at her screen in confusion. She pulled up Google and typed Rowan Automotive Group, her stomach sinking as the search results loaded. Rowan Automotive Group, parent company of Brighton Auto Repair and 17 other automotive service chains across 6 states, founded in 1987 by Robert Rowan, expanded throughout the 90s, currently led by CEO Graham Rowan following his father's death in 2019. Annual revenue, $340 million. Employees, approximately 4,000 to 200 across all locations. Amani scrolled through the images section. There was Graham Rowan at various corporate events, press releases, charity functions. And there, in a photo from a memorial service 6 years ago, was Mabel, identified in the caption as Mabel Rowan, widow of founder Robert Rowan, mother of CEO Graham Rowan. Oh, hell, Amani whispered to her empty apartment. She'd fixed the brakes of the founder's widow, the current CEO's mother. And Derek, in his infinite wisdom and cruelty, had called her some broke old lady and threatened to call the cops for trespassing. Derek had no idea what he'd done. Amani felt a wild, inappropriate laugh building in her chest. The absurdity of it, the cosmic justice of Derek choosing this particular elderly woman to humiliate, this particular moment to demonstrate exactly who he was when he thought no one important was watching. She thought about Mabel standing in the service bay doorway, offering her $40 with dignity and tact, saying she wanted to speak to the owner about service quality. Derek had laughed at her, had literally laughed in the face of the woman whose late husband had built the company that paid his salary. The laugh escaped, slightly manic, echoing in her small apartment. Her neighbor pounded on the wall. "Keep it down!" But Amani couldn't stop. It was too much, too perfectly terrible. The kind of situational irony that felt scripted, except it was devastatingly real. Eventually, the laughter subsided into hiccups, then silence. Amani sat on her dying couch in her apartment, with 8 days until eviction, unemployed and exhausted and completely uncertain what happened next. But somewhere in the corporate offices of Rowan Automotive Group, someone was reviewing security footage. Someone was documenting Derek's words. Someone was asking questions that Derek probably wasn't prepared to answer. She should feel vindicated. She should feel like justice was finally circling back around. Instead, she just felt tired and worried about Mabel's brake job being finished correctly, and anxious about whether Paolo had remembered to check the torque sequence Derek probably didn't know. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, texting. "My buddy says you can start Monday if you want. $18 hour to start, goes up after 90 days if you're any good, benefits after 6 months. Shop's clean, owner's decent."
Interested? $18 an hour was $2 less than Brighton had paid. No benefits for 6 months meant she'd be uninsured and praying nothing went wrong medically. Starting a new job while facing eviction was going to be complicated. But it was also a lifeline, extended by people who barely knew her but respected what she'd done. Very interested, she typed back. Thank you. Monday, 7 a.m. Shop's called Martinez Auto. Address 847 5th Street. Amani stared at the address, 5th Street, the same location she'd told Mabel about. She hadn't known Rodriguez had become Martinez, but apparently the good shop stayed good, just changed hands occasionally. She managed 4 hours of fitful sleep before her alarm startled her awake at 6. The eviction notice still sat on her coffee table, a tangible reminder of urgency. She made instant coffee, the cheap kind that tasted like burnt regret, and forced herself to pull up her laptop and start documenting everything from the previous night while the details were fresh. The break assessment, Derek's exact words, the parts Marcus had provided, the timeline, everything. She didn't know why she was documenting it, only that Uncle Ray had taught her to always keep records when something felt important, when there might be questions later. She was finishing her notes when her phone rang. Unknown number again, but a different area code. She answered warily. Amani Brooks? A man's voice this time, deeper, with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself. Yes? This is Graham Rowan. I believe you met my mother yesterday. Amani's coffee cup stopped halfway to her mouth. The CEO. The actual CEO of the parent company was calling her directly. Her mind blanked, then raced, trying to figure out appropriate responses. Yes, sir, I didn't realize who she was. I just saw someone who needed help. I know, she told me everything. There was something raw in his voice, something that transcended corporate professionalism. Ms. Brooks, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. When you made the decision to help my mother, were you aware that doing so would result in your termination? Yes, sir. And you did it anyway? Yes, sir. Her breaks were dangerous. I couldn't... Amani stopped, trying to find words that didn't sound rehearsed or self-serving. I couldn't let her drive away knowing she might not make it home. That's not who I am. Silence stretched between them, long enough that Amani wondered if she'd said something wrong. Then Graham spoke again, and his voice was thick with emotion. My father started this company because he'd been stranded on the side of the road with a pregnant wife, and a mechanic charged him triple because he was desperate. Dad built Rowan Automotive on the principle that car repair shouldn't be predatory, that people deserved honest service regardless of their financial situation. And yesterday, 38 years later, a manager at one of our shops called my 78-year-old mother a scam artist and threatened her with police because she couldn't afford a full brake job up front. Sir, Please, let me finish. Graham's voice steadied. My mother is the toughest person I know. She worked ER nursing for 40 years. She raised 3 kids while my father built this business. She survived cancer twice. And yesterday, she stood in that waiting room and cried because she was treated like she didn't matter, like her 40 years of work and contribution to society meant nothing because she's on a fixed income now. Amani heard him take a breath, compose himself. Then you stepped in. You risked your job. You lost your job because you saw a person who needed help and you helped her. That's what my father built this company to be. That's what we've forgotten somewhere along the way. And I need... His voice cracked slightly. I need to know if you'd be willing to help me figure out how we got so far from those principles and how we get back. I don't understand, Amani said carefully. Help you how? I'm restructuring Brighton Auto Repair, starting immediately. Derek Harlan is being terminated and investigated for discriminatory practices, fraudulent billing, and systematic abuse of company policy. I need someone who understands what good service looks like from the ground up. Someone who remembers why we do this work. Someone who... He paused. Someone who would sacrifice their own security to make sure an elderly woman got home safely. Amani's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Sir, I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm just a mechanic. I'm 26 years old. I don't have management experience or business training or... You have integrity, Graham interrupted.
You have the instincts my father spent his whole life trying to teach people. Everything else we can train. Ms. Brooks, I'm offering you a position as Regional Service Advisor, reporting directly to me. Your job would be to visit our locations, identify problems, recommend changes, and help implement a culture shift across the organization. Starting salary is $72,000, full benefits, company car, and a mandate to tell me uncomfortable truths about what's actually happening in our shops. Amani sat down heavily, her legs suddenly unreliable.
$72,000. That was more than triple what she'd been making at Brighton. That was impossible. That was the kind of offer that didn't happen to people like her. I need time to think, she managed. Of course. But Ms. Brooks, I need you to understand something. What happened yesterday, what Derek did to my mother, what you did to help her, that's going to become very public very quickly. We're conducting a full investigation. Security footage is being reviewed. Former employees are being interviewed. This isn't going away quietly. Is that a threat? No. Graham's voice gentled. It's a heads up. Derek has already started calling his contacts at other shops, spreading stories about you being difficult, insubordinate, someone who violates policy. He's trying to make sure you can't find work elsewhere in the industry. I'm telling you this so you know what you're facing, and so you know that I'm prepared to publicly support what you did and correct his narrative. But that support comes with attention you might not want. Amani thought about the job offer from Martinez Auto. $18 an hour, benefits after 6 months, honest work with decent people, safe, predictable, anonymous. Then she thought about Derek, systematically destroying her reputation, calling his industry contacts to ensure she couldn't find work. Thought about Mabel, probably not the only vulnerable customer he'd dismissed with cruelty. Thought about Paulo and Big Mike and Marcus, all trapped in a system that punished kindness and rewarded efficiency over humanity. What happened to my mother yesterday happens at our locations more often than I want to believe, Graham continued. We've been focused on expansion and profit margins and franchising, and somewhere in that growth we forgot why my father started this company. People like Derek thrive because no one's checking whether our principles are being maintained. I need to fix that. I need help fixing that, and right now you're the only person I trust to tell me the truth about what's broken. Why me? Amani asked. You don't know me. You have HR professionals, consultants, people with actual qualifications. Because you did the right thing when it cost you everything, Graham said simply. That's rarer than you think, especially in leadership. Amani closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was too much, too fast, too surreal. 12 hours ago, she'd been fired. Now she was being offered a position that could change her entire life, or spectacularly blow up in her face if she was out of her depth. Can I think about it for 24 hours? She asked. You can have 48. Call this number when you decide. Graham paused. Ms. Brooks, regardless of what you choose, thank you. Thank you for seeing my mother as someone who mattered. Thank you for being willing to sacrifice your security for hers. And thank you for reminding me what this company is supposed to stand for. After the call ended, Amani sat motionless for a long time, her cold coffee forgotten, her laptop screen dimmed to black. Through the thin walls, she could hear her neighbors starting their day, showers running, coffee makers gurgling, morning routines that assumed the world would continue in predictable patterns. Her world had just tilted sideways. She pulled up her banking app, $43.27. Pulled up her email. 3 messages from creditors, 1 from her landlord's attorney, 0 from job prospects. Looked at the eviction notice, 7 days remaining. This was her reality, precarious, exhausted, one emergency away from homelessness. Or she could accept Graham's offer and step into something completely unknown, something that felt too big for someone like her, something that might expose her inadequacies to an entire corporate structure. Her phone buzzed. Paulo, texting. Derek spent all morning calling shops, telling them you're blacklisted. Heads up. Then Big Mike. Derek's on a rampage. Be careful. Then Marcus. Just got a weird call asking about you from Rowan Corporate. Told them you're the best mechanic I know. Whatever's happening, I got your back. Amani stared at the messages, feeling something shift in her chest. Derek was actively trying to destroy her, and her former coworkers were actively defending her.
This wasn't abstract anymore. This wasn't about her individual situation. This was about a system that allowed people like Derek to wield power cruelly, and whether that system could be challenged. She thought about Mabel's shaking hands.
Thought about Uncle Ray teaching her that good mechanics take care of people, not just cars. Thought about Terrence, brilliant and exhausted, trying to build a better life through education. Thought about her mother, who'd spent 30 years cleaning other people's houses and taught her children that dignity came from how you treated others, especially when you had the power to help or hurt. What would Uncle Ray tell her to do? What would her mother say? The answer came clearly. They'd tell her to be scared, to feel out of her depth, to acknowledge the risk, and to do it anyway, because opportunities to actually change things were rare and precious and shouldn't be wasted just because they felt impossible. Amani pulled out her phone and typed a message to Graham Rowan's number. I don't need 48 hours. My answer is yes. When do I start? The response came within 60 seconds. Monday morning, 8 a.m., corporate headquarters. Bring questions. And Ms. Brooks? Thank you. She sat back, her heart racing, simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. She had 3 days to prepare for a job she didn't fully understand, to transform from struggling mechanic to corporate advisor, to figure out how to navigate a world she'd only ever seen from the outside. And somewhere across town, in the Brighton auto repair manager's office, Derek Harlan was sitting at his desk, completely unaware that the security footage from the previous night was being compiled into a presentation. Completely unaware that HR was building a case. Completely unaware that his casual cruelty to an elderly woman had triggered an investigation that was about to expose patterns he'd assumed would stay buried forever. He was scrolling through his contact list, making calls, spreading stories about the difficult black mechanic he'd had to fire for insubordination, confident in his narrative, secure in his authority, certain that his version of events would be the only one that mattered. In 3 days, Derek's certainty would begin to crumble. In a week, his career would be over. In a month, his name would become a case study in exactly what Rowan Automotive Group would no longer tolerate. But in this moment, he was still the manager, still in control, still convinced that power meant never having to face consequences. Amani spent the rest of Friday morning researching Rowan Automotive Group, reading employee reviews, studying the company's stated values versus apparent practices. The disconnect was striking. Founding principles about honest service and fair treatment sat alongside Glassdoor reviews describing toxic management, discrimination, and systematic corner cutting. Someone had built something good, and somewhere in the expansion, that goodness had been corrupted. Graham was right. The company needed fixing. The question was whether someone like her, young, inexperienced, carrying the baggage of being fired, could possibly be effective in a role that required authority she'd never possessed. Her phone rang. Terrence. Sis, what the hell? I just got a call from some corporate HR lady asking about your character and work ethic. What's going on? Amani explained, the story spilling out in a rush. Mabel's identity, Graham's offer, Derek's retaliation, the job she'd just accepted. Terrence listened in silence until she finished. So you went from fired to corporate advisor in less than 24 hours, he said finally. I know it sounds insane. It sounds like exactly what you deserve. Sis, you're brilliant. You've always been brilliant. The only thing holding you back has been people like Derek, who couldn't see past their own biases. His voice strengthened with conviction. You take this job. You take it and you make them see what I've always known, that you're the smartest, most capable person in any room you walk into. I'm terrified. Good. That means you understand what's at stake. But you're also angry, and you should be. Use it. Use that anger to change things for everyone still trapped working for people like Derek. After they hung up, Amani allowed herself a moment of pure feeling, fear and hope, and determination tangled together. Then she opened her laptop and started making lists. Questions to ask Graham. Research on automotive service industry standards. Notes on every policy Derek had implemented that prioritized profit over people. Documentation of discriminatory practices she'd witnessed. A preliminary framework for what good service culture should look like. She worked through the afternoon, fueled by cheap coffee and the kind of focused intensity that comes when everything suddenly matters.
When her phone buzzed with a message from Martinez Auto offering her the $18 an hour position, she responded with gratitude and explanation that she'd accepted another opportunity. They responded immediately with congratulations and an open invitation if things didn't work out. Good people, she thought. The industry had good people scattered throughout it. The challenge was creating systems that empowered them instead of forcing them to choose between principles and survival. Saturday arrived with surprising news. Derek had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Paolo texted her the details. Corporate had shown up Friday afternoon with lawyers and HR representatives, interviewed everyone, copied security footage, and escorted Derek out of the building. The shop was being run temporarily by the assistant manager from the location across town. Everyone's freaking out, Paolo's message continued. Corporate's asking questions about everything: billing practices, customer treatment, employee complaints. Derek kept files on everyone's performance issues, but turns out half of them were BS he made up to justify firing people or denying raises. They found documentation of him overcharging elderly customers and pocketing the difference. It's bad, Brooks. Really bad. Amani read the message twice, processing the implications. Derek hadn't just been cruel. He'd been systematically fraudulent, using his authority to exploit vulnerable customers while covering his tracks with manufactured employee problems. How many people had he hurt? How many mechanics had he fired for refusing to participate? How many customers had been overcharged or dismissed or treated like they didn't matter? You okay? Paulo asked. Yeah, just processing. How's Mabel's car? Finished it myself Friday night, triple-checked everything. She picked it up this morning, tried to pay the full amount. Corporate told her no charge, and they're refunding her for overcharges Derek hit her with on previous visits going back 3 years. She asked about you, said to tell you thank you. Amani felt warmth spread through her chest. Mabel was safe. Her brakes were fixed properly, and somewhere in corporate headquarters, someone was taking the broader implications seriously. Sunday she spent preparing, choosing interview-appropriate clothes from her limited wardrobe, printing copies of her notes and questions, rehearsing how to present herself as professional and capable, despite feeling like an imposter about to be exposed. She called her mother, explained the situation in simplified terms, received blessing and warnings in equal measure. "Baby, this sounds like an opportunity," her mother said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades navigating white corporate spaces while cleaning them. But opportunities can be traps, too. You watch yourself. You document everything. And you remember, you're there because you're good at what you do, not because they're doing you a favor. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of autumn day that felt like possibility. Imani dressed carefully, black slacks, white blouse, blazer she'd bought for Uncle Ray's funeral and never worn since. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. She looked professional, competent, like someone who belonged in corporate headquarters. She hoped the appearance would eventually match the reality. Rowan Automotive Group headquarters was a modern glass building in the business district, all clean lines and architectural statements about success. Imani parked her 12-year-old Honda in the visitor lot, feeling acutely aware of how it looked among the newer vehicles, then forced herself to stop caring. Her car ran perfectly because she maintained it properly. That was what mattered. The lobby was all marble and corporate art, reception desk staffed by someone who looked like they'd never had a day of uncertainty in their life. Imani approached with her spine straight, channeling confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Imani Brooks for Graham Rowan, 8 a.m. appointment." The receptionist typed something, smiled professionally. "Mr. Rowan is expecting you. 9th floor, suite 900. The elevators are just past security." Security was a badge printer and a board guard who checked her ID and handed her a visitor pass. The elevator was glass-walled, offering views of the city as it climbed. Imani watched the streets fall away, thinking about how different the world looked from this height, how easy it would be to forget about the people down there struggling with break jobs and eviction notices and managers who treated them like they were disposable. She wouldn't forget. That would be her job, to remember, to bridge the gap between corporate decisions and human impact. The 9th floor was quieter than she'd expected. Carpeted hallways, closed office doors, the muted hum of professional work happening behind wood panels. Suite 900 had glass doors with Graham Rowan's name etched professionally.
Amani knocked, heard, "Come in," and entered a space that somehow managed to feel both expensive and genuine. Graham Rowan was younger than she'd expected, maybe early 40s, with his mother's blue eyes and the kind of tired that came from carrying too much responsibility. He stood when she entered, extending his hand. "Miss Brooks, thank you for coming." His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. His office filled with photos, corporate events, yes, but also family pictures, including several of Mabel at various ages, always smiling. On his desk sat what looked like an old timing belt, mounted like a trophy. Following her gaze, Graham smiled slightly. "My father's first successful repair. He kept it as a reminder of where we started." Amani nodded, understanding completely. She had Uncle Ray's first torque wrench in her toolbox for the same reason. "Ms. Brooks, before we discuss your role, I want to show you something." Graham pulled up his computer, turned the monitor toward her. "This is security footage from Brighton Auto Repair, Thursday evening. I've watched it 14 times. I need you to watch it with me and tell me what you see." The footage was black and white, time-stamped, showing multiple angles. Amani watched herself working on Mabel's car, watched Derek approach, watched the confrontation unfold silently. Then the angle switched to the waiting room, showing Derek's initial interaction with Mabel. His dismissive wave, his pointing toward the exit, Mabel's tears. Graham paused the video on a frame, showing Derek's expression as he turned away from Mabel. Contempt, pure and undiluted. "Tell me what you see," Graham said quietly. Amani studied the frozen image. "I see a man who's forgotten that every customer is someone's mother, someone's grandmother. I see someone who's decided that dignity is conditional on payment capacity. I see—" She stopped, choosing her words carefully. "I see someone who's been operating without oversight long enough to believe his behavior is acceptable." "Because it was never challenged," Graham finished. "Because I was focused on expansion metrics and profit margins and franchising opportunities, and I trusted that good managers were maintaining my father's principles. I trusted wrong." He closed the video, pulled up a spreadsheet instead. "This is 6 months of complaint data from Brighton Auto Repair. 47 formal complaints filed with corporate. Every single one was resolved by Derek with explanations that made the customers sound unreasonable. Every single investigation stopped with his version of events. We never dug deeper because the numbers looked good. Revenue was up, customer count was steady, employee retention was within acceptable ranges." Acceptable ranges? Amani couldn't keep the edge out of her voice. 40% annual turnover, which apparently is normal for automotive service. Graham's jaw tightened. But it shouldn't be normal. It's normal because we've accepted a culture where good mechanics leave or burn out or get fired for caring too much, and the Derek Harlans of the world thrive because they hit their numbers regardless of how many people they hurt doing it. He stood, walked to his window overlooking the city. "Ms. Brooks, I'm going to be very direct with you. This company needs a complete cultural overhaul, and I don't know how to do it. I know business. I know finance. I know expansion strategy. But I don't know how to identify the difference between a manager who's genuinely effective and one who's just good at hiding problems. I need someone who understands ground-level reality, someone who can walk into a shop and immediately spot what's wrong, someone who—" He turned to face her. "Someone who would sacrifice their job rather than compromise their principles." Amani met his eyes. "That person also has no management experience, no corporate training, and no idea how to navigate the politics that let people like Derek stay in power. Then we'll get you training. We'll assign you mentors. We'll give you resources and support and authority to make recommendations that will actually be implemented." Graham returned to his desk. "But first, I need to know if you're willing to do this. Willing to visit shops and tell me uncomfortable truths. Willing to push back when I'm wrong. Willing to help me figure out how to honor my father's legacy, instead of letting it be corrupted into something he wouldn't recognize." Amani thought about Thursday night, Mabel's tears, Derek's cruelty, her own decision to help despite the cost. Thought about Paolo and Big Mike and Marcus, good people trapped in bad systems. Thought about every mechanic who'd been fired for caring, every customer who'd been dismissed because they couldn't afford full service up front. "I'm willing," she said, "but I need something from you. Name it. Complete transparency. Access to complaint data, employee reviews, financial records, everything. No information held back because it's proprietary or sensitive. If I'm going to help fix this, I need to see exactly how broken it is. Graham nodded immediately. Done. What else? Protection for employees who talk to me. I'm going to be asking questions that might implicate managers, might reveal problems people have been told to ignore. They need to know speaking honestly won't cost them their jobs. Agreed. I'll have legal draft formal whistleblower protections and distribute them company-wide. Amani pulled out her notebook, consulting her prepared list. Training budget for mechanics who want to improve their skills. Derek's model was hire cheap and replace frequently. That creates institutional knowledge gaps and prevents quality improvement. How much do you need? The question caught her off guard. She'd expected negotiation, pushback, corporate budget constraints. I don't know yet. I need to assess what kind of training gaps exist across locations. Then assess them and tell me the number. What else? They spent the next hour going through her preliminary recommendations. Standardized service protocols, customer satisfaction follow-ups, anonymous employee feedback systems, community partnerships for customers who genuinely couldn't afford essential repairs. Graham took notes, asked clarifying questions, and accepted almost everything without argument. Finally, he closed his laptop and looked at her directly. Ms. Brooks, I need you to understand something. What we're about to do is going to make people angry. Derek isn't the only manager operating this way. He's just the one who got caught. When we start enforcing actual standards, when we start holding people accountable for how they treat customers and employees, we're going to face resistance. Some managers will quit. Some mechanics will push back. Some franchise owners will threaten legal action. It's going to be messy and uncomfortable, and there will be moments when you question whether it's worth it. Is it worth it? Amani asked. Graham pulled the photo of Mabel from his desk, the one where she was younger, standing beside a man who must have been Robert Rowan in the shop that started it all. My father built this company because he believed car repair didn't have to be predatory. He believed people deserved honest service, regardless of their financial situation. He believed mechanics should be respected professionals, not disposable labor. And he believed that doing good business and doing good in the world weren't mutually exclusive. He set the photo down gently. That's worth fighting for. The question is whether you believe it too. Amani looked at the photo, seeing the pride and hope in their younger faces, thinking about how ideals erode over time when no one actively defends them, thinking about Uncle Ray teaching her that good mechanics take care of people, thinking about Mabel's shaking hands and the choice she'd made Thursday night. I believe it, she said. Let's get started. Graham handed her a file folder so thick it required both hands to hold. 6 months of complaint documentation, employee termination records, customer satisfaction surveys that had been carefully filtered through Derek's reporting before reaching corporate. Amani spread the contents across the conference table in Graham's office, and the pattern emerged immediately, stark and undeniable. Every complaint about service quality was dismissed as customer misunderstanding. Every employee concern was reframed as performance issues. Every suggestion for improvement was noted as addressed, then quietly ignored. Derek's fingerprints were all over the systematic burial of problems, but he wasn't alone. Similar patterns showed up across 7 other locations, each managed by someone who'd learned that hiding problems was more valuable than solving them. This is institutional, Amani said, running her finger down a spreadsheet showing employee turnover by location. Brighton topped the list at 43% annually, but 3 other shops weren't far behind. This isn't just Derek being cruel. This is a management philosophy that's been rewarded. Graham leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his expression tight with controlled anger. Show me. Amani pulled out specific examples, laying them side by side. Here's Brighton, June complaint about brake job pricing. Customer says they were quoted $300, charged $750 at checkout. Derek's resolution. Customer misunderstood initial quote. All charges appropriate. Here's Riverside location. Similar complaint 2 weeks later. Almost identical language in the resolution. Here's Northside. 3 complaints in 1 month about surprise charges. All resolved the same way. She grabbed another stack. Now look at employee terminations. Brighton fired 6 mechanics in 5 months, all for policy violations or performance issues. But when you cross-reference with the dates, Each termination happened within 2 weeks of that mechanic filing an internal complaint or pushing back on a billing practice. Graham moved closer, studying the documents. His jaw worked silently as the implications became clear. They're not just hiding individual problems, Amani continued. They're systematically eliminating anyone who might report those problems. And they're doing it in a way that looks legitimate on paper. Performance issues, policy violations, insubordination. But the timing tells the real story. Complain, get fired, push back, get fired, question anything, get fired. How many mechanics? Graham's voice was rough. Amani consulted her notes. Across all locations in the past year, 73 terminations flagged as potentially retaliatory. That's 73 people who probably lost their jobs for trying to do the right thing. The number hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. 73 lives disrupted, families affected, careers derailed, all because managers had learned that eliminating problems was easier than fixing them. Graham walked to his window, staring out at the city without seeming to see it. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone confronting a failure they couldn't ignore. My father would be ashamed, not of them, of me. I let this happen. I was so focused on growth that I stopped checking whether we were growing something worth having. You didn't know, Imani offered, but Graham shook his head sharply. I should have known. That's my job, to know, to ensure that the company he built with his hands and his principles doesn't become just another corporation that chews people up and spits them out. He turned back to face her. We're fixing this. All of it. Starting now. What do you need? Amani had spent the weekend preparing for this moment, anticipating resistance and budget constraints and corporate hesitation. Graham's immediate acceptance threw her off balance. I need to visit every location, talk to current employees, review practices, identify which managers are like Derek and which are actually trying to maintain standards. But that's going to take time, and it's going to require those employees trusting me enough to tell the truth. They won't trust corporate, Graham said flatly. Not after years of complaints being buried and whistleblowers being fired. They'll see you as another investigator looking to protect the company, not help them. Probably, Amani agreed. Which is why I need to approach this differently, not as corporate oversight, but as someone who's been where they are. Someone who got fired for doing the right thing and came back because someone was willing to listen. Graham studied her thoughtfully. You want to tell your story? I want to be honest. I'm 26 years old. I got fired from Brighton 4 days ago, and now I'm supposed to help reform company culture. That's going to sound insane to mechanics who've been doing this work for decades. But if I'm upfront about it, if I tell them exactly what happened with your mother and Derek, if I acknowledge that I'm inexperienced but willing to learn, maybe some of them will take a chance on trusting me. That makes you vulnerable. I'm already vulnerable. I'm a young black woman walking into shops that are 90% male, mostly white, with management cultures that have been toxic for years. Pretending I'm some kind of authority figure isn't going to help, but showing up honestly, acknowledging what I don't know while demonstrating what I do, that might. Graham considered this, then nodded slowly. Okay, we'll do it your way. But you're not going alone. Carolyn Martinez from HR will accompany you to each location. She's been with the company 15 years, knows everyone, and has been trying to flag these problems for months. Between the two of you, you'll have both ground-level perspective and institutional knowledge. The Carolyn who called me Friday night? The same. She's been documenting problems for years, but without the CEO's direct backing, her reports kept getting filtered through regional managers who had every incentive to bury them. That changes now. Her documentation becomes the foundation of your investigation, and her presence signals that corporate is taking this seriously. Amani felt something loosen in her chest, relief at not having to navigate this alone, gratitude for partnership with someone who understood the institutional landscape. When do we start? Tomorrow. I'm calling an emergency meeting of all regional and location managers this afternoon. I'm going to show them the security footage from Brighton. I'm going to tell them about Derek's termination and the investigation. And I'm going to introduce you as the person leading our cultural assessment, with my direct authority to make recommendations that will be implemented. Some of them are going to quit. Let them. We'll rebuild with people who actually want to be here for the right reasons. The confidence in his voice was almost convincing, but Amani caught the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the edge of his desk. He was terrified too, she realized. Terrified of what they'd find. Terrified of blowing up a company his father had built. Terrified that the rot might go deeper than either of them wanted to believe. "What if it's worse than we think?" Imani asked quietly. "What if Derek isn't an outlier? What if this is just how the industry works now, and we're fighting against something too big to change?" Graham met her eyes. "Then we fight anyway." Right. Because the alternative is becoming complicit in something my father spent his life trying to prevent. Because 73 people lost their jobs for having integrity, and that can't be acceptable. Because my mother, his voice caught. Because my mother stood in one of our waiting rooms and cried because she was treated like trash. And if that can happen to her, it's happening to hundreds of other people we'll never even know about. He pulled out his phone, typed rapidly, then looked up. "I just sent you access credentials for every system we have. Financial records, HR files, customer databases, complaint logs, security footage archives, everything. No restrictions. And I'm scheduling a press conference for Friday. I'm going to publicly acknowledge the problems we've found, announce Derek's termination, and commit to a comprehensive review of all our locations. That gives us 4 days to get ahead of the story and start implementing changes." "That's fast," Imani said, her mind racing through implications. "Really fast. Managers are going to panic. Employees are going to be anxious. Customers are going to question whether they can trust us. Good. Let them panic. Let them be anxious. The ones who are doing things right have nothing to worry about, and the ones who are operating like Derek need to understand that the protection they've been relying on is gone." Graham's expression hardened. "Ms. Brooks, I know this is moving quickly. I know you're probably feeling overwhelmed, but we have a narrow window here between identifying the problem and losing momentum. If we move slowly, if we're cautious and incremental, the institutional resistance will kill this reform before it starts. We need to move fast, be aggressive, and demonstrate that this isn't just talk." Imani thought about the eviction notice she'd peeled off her door 4 days ago, about the $43 that had been her entire safety net, about the terror of unemployment and the impossible leap from fired mechanic to corporate reformer. She thought about Mabel's shaking hands and Derek's contemptuous laugh and 73 people who'd been fired for caring. "Okay," she said, "let's move fast. But I need one thing first." "What's that?" "I need to talk to Mabel. I need to hear her story directly, understand what she experienced beyond what the security footage shows. If I'm going to convince mechanics across this company that change is real, I need to be able to speak authentically about why it matters." Graham pulled out his phone again, dialed, and put it on speaker. It rang 3 times before Mabel's familiar voice answered. "Graham, is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Mom. I'm here with Imani Brooks. She'd like to talk with you about what happened Thursday, if you're willing." There was a pause, then Mabel's voice strengthened with emotion. "Imani? Oh, honey, I've been thinking about you constantly. How are you?" The genuine concern in her voice hit Imani unexpectedly hard. "I'm okay, Mrs. Rowan. Better than okay, actually. Your son offered me a job helping reform company culture, and I'm trying to make sure I do it right. Would you be willing to talk with me about Thursday? About what you experienced before I stepped in?" Of course I will. When?" Graham checked his watch. "I have the manager meeting in 2 hours. Could you come to my office now? We could talk before then." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. After the call ended, Graham left to prepare for the meeting, leaving Imani alone with the stacks of documentation and the weight of what they were about to attempt. She pulled out her notebook and started organizing thoughts, trying to structure the approaching conversation in a way that would be both respectful and thorough. She needed to understand not just what had happened, but how it had felt. The emotional reality of being dismissed and humiliated, the fear that came with unsafe breaks, the desperation of needing help and being turned away. 17 minutes later, the receptionist called to announce Mabel's arrival. Imani met her at the elevator and they embraced like old friends rather than near strangers who'd met in crisis. Mabel looked stronger than she had Thursday night, rested, steady on her feet, her eyes clear and determined rather than devastated. "You look good," Imani said, meaning it. "So do you. Professional, like you belong here." Mabel squeezed her hand. "Graham told me what you're doing.
Told me you're going to help him fix what's broken. I'm so proud of you. They settled in Graham's office, and Amani pulled out her recorder. Mrs. Rowan, would you mind if I record this? I want to make sure I get your story exactly right. Call me Mabel, honey. And yes, record whatever you need. Amani pressed record and began gently. Can you tell me about Thursday? Start from when you first realized your brakes were failing. Mabel's hands folded in her lap, and her expression grew distant with memory. It was Wednesday morning, actually. I was coming back from my volunteer shift at the hospital. I still volunteer in the gift shop twice a week. Helps me feel useful. And I pressed the brake pedal at a red light, and it just kept going down. I had to pump it 3 times before the car stopped, and even then, I could feel it wasn't right. There was this terrible grinding noise, like metal screaming. Her voice remained steady, but Amani saw her fingers tighten together. I know I should have stopped driving immediately. I know that. But I live on my Social Security, and it was still 10 days until my check came in. I had $40 in my purse and maybe $60 in the bank. A tow truck alone would cost more than that, never mind the repairs. So I thought, I'll just drive carefully, avoid highways, get to the repair shop and figure it out. You called Brighton for an appointment, Amani prompted. Wednesday afternoon, I spoke with a young woman who sounded very professional. She said they could see me Thursday at 4 o'clock, that they specialized in brake work, that they'd take good care of me. I wrote it down on my calendar. Thursday, 4 p.m., Brighton Auto Repair. I even called Thursday morning to confirm, spoke with someone different who said yes, they had me in the system. Mabel's expression darkened. But when I got there, that manager, Derek, he looked at me like I was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. I told him I had a 4 o'clock appointment for brake work. He went to his computer, typed something, then told me there was no appointment. Said I must be confused. Said maybe I'd called a different shop. What did you say? I told him I'd called twice, that I had confirmation, that I really needed help because my brakes were dangerous, and he... Mabel stopped, her composure cracking slightly. He looked me up and down, taking in my old coat and my walker, and probably calculating exactly how much money I didn't have. And he said, "Ma'am, we don't do walk-in charity work. You should have called ahead for an appointment." When I insisted I had called, he suggested I was trying to manipulate my way into free service. Tears welled in Mabel's eyes, but her voice remained strong. I'm 78 years old. I worked as an ER nurse for 40 years. I raised 3 children. I nursed my husband through cancer. I volunteered at that hospital gift shop every week for 6 years because it makes me feel like I still contribute something to the world. And this man, this manager at a company my husband built, treated me like I was trying to con him, like my life and safety didn't matter because I couldn't pay up front. Amani reached across and took Mabel's hand, saying nothing, just offering presents. I started crying, Mabel continued. Right there in the waiting room in front of everyone. I couldn't help it. I was so tired of struggling, so scared about the brakes, so humiliated by how he was treating me. I tried to explain one more time that I just needed help getting home safely, that I could pay $40 now and work out the rest, and he told me to leave. Actually pointed at the door and told me to get out before he called the police for trespassing. That's when I saw you, Amani said softly. That's when you saved me. Because I don't know what would have happened if I'd driven home on those brakes. I was terrified every time I touched the pedal. I kept imagining rolling through an intersection, hitting another car, hurting someone. Mabel wiped her eyes. You risked your job. You lost your job to help a stranger. Do you have any idea how rare that is? I just did what needed doing. No, Mabel said firmly. You did what good people do, and there aren't enough of you. That's why this matters, Amani. That's why what you and Graham are doing is so important, because if someone like me, someone who helped build this company, whose husband dedicated his life to it, can be treated like garbage when they're vulnerable, then it's happening to everyone. Every elderly person on a fixed income, every single parent struggling to get by, every person who needs help but can't afford the full price up front. They're all being turned away or exploited or humiliated, and someone needs to stop it. Amani turned off the recorder, her throat tight. Thank you for sharing this. I know it wasn't easy to relive. It's necessary, Mabel said simply. My husband used to say that businesses either serve people or exploit them, and the choice shows in every interaction. Derek chose exploitation because he'd learned it was rewarded. We need to make different choices get rewarded instead. She stood, steadying herself with her walker. Now, I should let you get to work, but Amani, one more thing. Yes? Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in this role. You're young, yes. You're inexperienced in corporate settings, yes. But you have something most executives never develop. You remember what it's like to be powerless, and that makes you better equipped to fix systems that hurt powerless people. Trust your instincts. They've served you well so far. After Mabel left, Amani sat alone with the recording and her notes, trying to process the emotional weight of what she'd just heard. This wasn't abstract corporate reform. This was about human dignity, about whether businesses would serve the Mabels of the world or exploit them. Graham returned to find her staring at her notes, her expression set with determination. Did you get what you needed? More than I expected, Amani said. Your mother is remarkable. She's a force of nature. Always has been. Graham checked his watch. The manager meeting starts in 15 minutes. Ready? No, but let's do it anyway. The conference room on the 10th floor was already filling when they arrived. 23 managers representing all of Rowan Automotive Group's locations, their expressions ranging from curious to anxious to defensively hostile. Amani felt their eyes track her as she entered with Graham, could practically hear the questions they weren't asking. Who is she? Why is she here? What's happening? Graham moved to the front of the room with the presence of someone who'd spent years managing people. But Amani caught the tension in his shoulders. Carolyn Martinez was already there, professional and composed, offering Amani a small nod of solidarity. Thank you all for coming on short notice, Graham began, his voice carrying authority that silenced the remaining conversations. I know many of you have questions about why you were called here urgently. I'm going to answer those questions directly, but I need you to watch something first. He dimmed the lights and started the security footage from Brighton Auto Repair. The room fell into profound silence as they watched Derek dismiss Mabel, watched the confrontation with Amani, watched the firing unfold in grainy black and white reality. When the footage ended, Graham turned the lights back on. The woman you just saw being dismissed and humiliated is my mother, Mabel Rowan. The manager who called her a scam artist and threatened her with police is Derek Harlan, who as of Friday morning is no longer employed by this company and is currently under investigation for fraud, discrimination, and systematic policy violations spanning at least 3 years. The silence shattered into murmurs. Graham raised his hand. The mechanic you saw being fired for helping my mother is Amani Brooks, who as of today is our new regional service advisor with direct authority to investigate practices at every location and make binding recommendations for reform. Ms. Martinez from HR will be partnering with her on this assessment. Every eye in the room turned to Amani. She met their gazes steadily, reading skepticism, resentment, calculation, and in a few faces, something that might have been hope. I need you to understand something, Graham continued, his voice hardening. What happened at Brighton isn't an isolated incident. We've identified similar patterns at multiple locations: discriminatory customer treatment, retaliatory employee terminations, fraudulent billing practices, systematic burial of complaints. This company was built on principles of honest service and fair treatment. Somewhere in our growth, we lost sight of those principles. That ends now. A manager in the front row, older, heavy-set, with the confident posture of someone who'd never been seriously challenged, raised his hand. Graham, with all due respect, Derek was dealing with a difficult situation. We all face customers who want free work or who don't understand that repairs cost money. Sometimes we have to be firm about boundaries. Did you watch the footage, Tom? Graham's voice could have cut steel. Did you see my mother crying? Did you hear Derek call her a scam artist? Did you see him threaten an elderly woman on a walker with police action because she asked for help with dangerous brakes? Tom's confidence faltered. I just mean that we need to consider context. The context is that my mother worked as a nurse for 40 years and couldn't afford a break job between Social Security checks. And instead of showing her basic human compassion, Derek treated her like criminal. The context is that Derek has been overcharging vulnerable customers and pocketing the difference for at least 2 years.
The context is that he fired 6 mechanics in 5 months for pushing back on unethical practices. That's the context, Tom. Does it change your perspective? Tom looked down, silent. Another manager spoke up, younger, nervous. What exactly is Ms. Brooks going to be investigating? Amani stepped forward before Graham could answer, knowing this was her moment to establish herself or fail. I'm going to visit every location over the next several weeks. I'm going to talk with mechanics, observe customer interactions, review billing practices, and assess whether the culture at each shop aligns with the company's stated values. I'm going to ask uncomfortable questions. I'm going to check whether complaints are being handled honestly or buried. And I'm going to recommend changes, up to and including management terminations for anyone operating the way Derek did. You're a mechanic, Tom said, and the dismissiveness in his tone was obvious. What qualifies you to assess management practices? You're right, Amani said calmly. I am a mechanic. I'm 26 years old, I was fired from Brighton 4 days ago, and I have 0 management experience. What I do have is 14 months of working under Derek Harlan, watching him treat good mechanics like disposable equipment and vulnerable customers like Marks to be exploited. I know what bad management looks like from the receiving end, and I know what good service should be because I was trained by someone who believed mechanics exist to help people, not extract maximum profit from their desperation. She pulled out her phone, called up the recording of Mabel's interview, and played the section where Mabel described being told to leave. The audio quality was clear enough that everyone heard the pain in her voice, the dignity-stripping humiliation of being treated as less than human. That's what I'm qualified to investigate, Amani continued when the recording ended. Whether we're treating people like that, whether we've created cultures where managers feel empowered to dismiss elderly women with safety issues because they're inconvenient or unprofitable, whether mechanics are being fired for having integrity. If you're not doing those things, my investigation won't be a problem for you. If you are, she let the implication hang. Another manager, this one middle-aged with kind eyes that suggested actual concern, raised her hand. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but what if we've been operating within company policy? What if the procedures we've been following are the ones we were trained on? Then we'll change the policies, Graham said flatly. Ms. Brooks has full authority to recommend policy changes, and I will implement them. This isn't about punishing people for following bad procedures. It's about identifying the procedures that need to change and making sure everyone understands the new expectations. What about franchise locations? Someone asked. They're independently owned. They carry our name, Graham interrupted. They represent our brand. They will meet our standards or lose their franchise agreements. I've already spoken with legal about this. Every franchise contract includes quality and service requirements. We're going to start enforcing them. The meeting continued for another hour, Graham fielding questions and concerns, while Amani stood beside him, visible proof that things were changing. Some managers seemed genuinely relieved. Perhaps they'd been trying to maintain standards despite pressure to cut corners. Others looked defensive or openly hostile. A few simply looked resigned, like they'd already decided this wasn't worth fighting. When it finally ended, Graham pulled Amani and Carolyn aside. How do you think that went? Half of them hate me, Amani said honestly. Quarter of them are cautiously hopeful. The rest are waiting to see if this is real or just corporate theater that'll blow over. Accurate, Carolyn agreed. Tom Davidson is going to be a problem. He runs our highest revenue location and thinks that makes him untouchable. Sarah Chen looked relieved. I know she's been trying to implement better customer service protocols, but getting blocked by regional management. The franchise owners are going to push back hard because they don't like corporate interference. Graham nodded, processing. Then we document everything meticulously. Every conversation, every observation, every recommendation. We make sure our case is airtight before we move on anyone. Carolyn, you're experienced with that. Walk Amani through proper documentation procedures. Already planned to, Carolyn said. We start tomorrow at Riverside location. It's got moderate complaint levels, not the worst, not the best. Good place to calibrate what we're looking for before we hit the problem locations. That evening, Amani returned to her apartment exhausted but wired with nervous energy. She'd stood in front of 23 managers and claimed authority she barely felt. had made promises about reform she wasn't sure she could deliver, had positioned herself as someone who could identify and fix systemic problems despite having no experience doing so. Her phone buzzed. Marcus? Texting. Heard about the manager meeting. You really told Tom Davidson he might get fired? News travels fast, Imani replied. Mechanics talk. We're all watching to see if this is real or corporate BS. Don't let us down. The weight of expectation settled heavily. This wasn't just about reforming company policy anymore. Every mechanic who'd been fired for having integrity, everyone who'd swallowed their principles to keep their job, everyone currently trapped in toxic environments, they were watching, hoping, waiting to see if things could actually change. Imani pulled out her notebook and started planning the Riverside visit. What questions would reveal truth? What observations would distinguish genuine culture from performance? How could she tell the difference between managers who maintained standards and ones who were just better at hiding problems than Derek? She worked until midnight, building assessment frameworks and interview protocols, trying to create structure around the instincts that had led her to help Mabel. Uncle Ray had always said good mechanics could diagnose problems by listening, not just to engines, but to what people weren't saying, to the gaps between official stories and actual reality. She'd need those same skills now, applied to organizational cultures instead of automotive systems. Tomorrow she'd start finding out if she was capable of this impossible job. Tomorrow she'd begin the real work of determining whether Rowan Automotive Group could be saved or whether the rot ran too deep to excise without killing the patient. Tomorrow she'd face her first location as corporate oversight instead of fired mechanic and discover whether anyone would trust her enough to tell the truth. But tonight, in her small apartment with the radiator clanking and the neighbors arguing through thin walls, Imani allowed herself a moment of pure terror. What if she failed? What if she couldn't identify the problems or convince people to change? What if she was wrong about what good culture looked like? What if Derek's approach was actually what survived in this industry, and everything else was naive idealism that couldn't sustain itself in competitive markets? Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Graham. Thank you for today. You were perfect, honest, direct, unintimidated. That's exactly what this needs. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start rebuilding. Imani read the message 3 times, letting the confidence in his words steady her own wavering resolve. She thought about Mabel's tears and Derek's contempt and 73 fired mechanics. Thought about Uncle Ray teaching her that good work mattered because people depended on it. Thought about her mother's voice saying dignity came from how you treated others when you had power over them. She could do this. She had to do this. Too many people were counting on someone finally standing up to the Derek Harlans of the world and saying enough. Tomorrow, she'd start proving it was possible. Riverside Auto Repair sat on a commercial strip between a tire discount warehouse and a fast food restaurant, its exterior cleaner than Brighton's but carrying the same corporate branding, the green and white Rowan Automotive sign, the plate glass windows overlooking the service bays, the customer waiting area visible from the street. Imani pulled into the parking lot at 7:30 Tuesday morning with Carolyn in the passenger seat, both of them carrying clipboards and the kind of nervous energy that comes before stepping into unknown territory. Remember, Carolyn said as they approached the entrance, we're here to observe and listen, not to make immediate accusations. Our job today is gathering information, establishing baseline understanding. We ask open-ended questions. We watch how people interact. We note discrepancies between policy and practice. And if we see something clearly wrong, Imani asked, we document it thoroughly and discuss with Graham before taking action. We're building a case, not conducting a witch hunt. Carolyn paused with her hand on the door. But if you see immediate safety issues or clear discrimination, we intervene. Use your judgment. The waiting area held 3 customers, a young mother with a toddler, an older man reading a newspaper, and a woman in business attire typing on her laptop. The receptionist looked up as they entered, her professional smile faltering slightly when she recognized the corporate credentials Carolyn presented. We're here to conduct a routine operational assessment, Carolyn said warmly. Nothing to be concerned about. We'll need to speak with your manager and observe shop operations for a few hours. Who's managing today? That's Kevin Torres. He's in the back. Should I call him? Please. While they waited, Imani studied the waiting area. It was clean but impersonal, the chair's standard corporate issue, the coffee station functional but sparse. The TV played morning news on mute. Posted pricing seemed straightforward. Oil change $49.99, brake inspection free with service, tire rotation 25. Nothing obviously predatory, but also nothing that suggested the shop went beyond minimum requirements. Kevin Torres emerged from the service bay looking exactly like someone who'd just been told corporate had arrived unannounced, anxious, defensive, already calculating what they might find wrong. He was maybe 40, Hispanic, with oil-stained hands he was wiping nervously on a shop rag. Mr. Torres, I'm Carolyn Martinez from Corporate HR, and this is Amani Brooks, our new regional service advisor. We're conducting operational assessments at all locations. This shouldn't take more than a few hours. Is this about Derek? Kevin asked immediately. Because I heard what happened at Brighton, and I want you to know we don't operate like that here. We treat customers right. We follow policy. This isn't specifically about Brighton, Amani said, keeping her voice gentle. We're assessing all locations to understand what's working well and what could improve. We'd like to observe your morning operations, speak with your mechanics, review some recent service tickets. Is that okay? Kevin relaxed slightly. Yeah, of course, whatever you need. Can I ask, are people in trouble? My guys are good mechanics. They work hard. We're not here to get anyone in trouble, Carolyn assured him. We're here to understand ground-level reality so corporate can make better decisions. If your team is doing good work, that's exactly what we want to document and learn from. They spent the next hour observing morning operations. The shop was busy but organized, 4 mechanics working simultaneously on different vehicles, Kevin moving between them offering guidance and checking work. The atmosphere felt professional, focused, nothing like the tense environment Amani remembered from Brighton. Mechanics asked Kevin questions and received thoughtful responses. Customer vehicles were handled carefully, not rushed through like products on an assembly line. But Amani also noticed small things that troubled her. When a customer called about pricing, she heard Kevin quote one number, then add, "But that's just for parts and basic labor. Diagnostic fees and shop supplies are additional, usually runs another 40 to 60. The kind of upcharge that wasn't illegal but felt designed to inflate final bills beyond initial quotes. When a mechanic approached Kevin about a customer's brake pads that were worn but not yet dangerous, Kevin said, "Customers here, car's already up, recommend replacement. They won't want to come back in 6 months." Nothing egregious, nothing obviously wrong, but a philosophy that prioritized immediate revenue over long-term customer trust, that saw service opportunities rather than service needs. During a break, Amani asked to speak with the mechanics individually. Kevin looked nervous but agreed, directing them to use his office. The first mechanic was Roberto, mid-50s, who'd been with Rowan Automotive for 12 years. "How would you describe the work culture here?" Amani asked after explaining her role. Roberto considered carefully. "It's okay. Kevin's fair mostly. He doesn't yell like some managers. He knows the work, respects that we know our stuff. But..." He stopped, clearly weighing whether to continue. "But," Carolyn prompted gently, "but there's pressure. To upsell. To find additional work beyond what customers asked for. Not lying about it. If brake pads are at 30%, we're supposed to recommend replacement, even though technically they're still safe for another few thousand miles. Kevin calls it preventive service recommendation, but it feels like we're pushing work people don't quite need yet." "Have you pushed back on this?" Amani asked. Roberto's expression turned guarded. "Once, a couple years ago. Years. Customer came in for an oil change, had brake pads at 40%. I told Kevin they were fine. Customer didn't need to spend the money. Kevin said I was leaving money on the table, and that if I wanted to advance in the company, I needed to understand business realities. I haven't pushed back since." "Did anything happen to you after that conversation?" Carolyn was taking notes. "Nothing official. But I didn't get the lead mechanic position when it opened 6 months later. Went to someone with less experience who was better at upselling. Message was clear. Play along or stay where you are." They spoke with 3 more mechanics, hearing variations of the same story. Riverside wasn't abusive like Brighton, but it had developed a culture where aggressive upselling was expected and resistance was career limiting. Customers weren't being defrauded exactly, but they were being sold services they didn't quite need yet through carefully worded recommendations that created urgency where none existed. When Amani and Carolyn reviewed service tickets during lunch, the pattern became quantifiable. Average ticket price at Riverside was 37% higher than at locations with similar customer demographics. Customer satisfaction scores were average, not terrible, but not good. And complaint records showed a recurring theme. Customers felt pressured, felt surprised by final bills, felt like they couldn't trust whether recommendations were necessary or profit-driven. "This is subtler than Brighton," Carolyn said, reviewing her notes. "Derek was openly cruel and clearly fraudulent. Kevin is following technically legal practices, but the cumulative effect is almost as damaging. Customers learning not to trust us, mechanics learning to prioritize sales over service." "It's death by 1,000 cuts," Amani agreed. "No single interaction is fireable, but the culture is fundamentally misaligned with stated values. How do we address it?" Carolyn tapped her pen against her clipboard. "We document it thoroughly, identify the specific policies and incentive structures driving the behavior, and recommend systemic changes. Kevin's not malicious. He's responding to metrics corporate has emphasized. We need to change what gets measured and rewarded." They spent the afternoon conducting similar assessments at Riverside's sister location across town, finding nearly identical patterns. Both managers were competent, non-abusive, and deeply invested in meeting revenue targets through aggressive service recommendations. Both had created cultures where mechanics understood that upselling was the path to advancement and questioning it was career suicide. That evening, back at corporate headquarters, Amani and Carolyn presented their findings to Graham. He listened in grim silence as they detailed the sophisticated ways good people were being incentivized to compromise their principles without quite crossing into obvious wrongdoing. "So we've created a system where the Derek Harlans abuse people overtly, while managers like Kevin do it subtly through policy compliance," Graham said when they finished. "And both outcomes undermine everything my father built." "Essentially, yes," Carolyn confirmed. "The incentive structure rewards revenue generation above all else. Managers who hit their numbers get bonuses and promotions regardless of how they achieve them. Customer satisfaction is tracked but not weighted heavily in performance reviews. Mechanic advancement is tied to upsell percentages rather than technical expertise or customer relationships." Graham stood, pacing to his window. The gesture Amani was learning meant he was processing difficult truths. "What do we change?" Amani pulled out her preliminary recommendations. "First, we completely restructure how we measure success. Customer satisfaction and retention become primary metrics, weighted higher than revenue and performance reviews. Second, we eliminate commission structures that reward upselling. Mechanics get paid for quality work and efficiency, not for maximizing ticket prices. Third, we implement mystery shopper programs. Corporate sends in customers with vehicles that have known issues to test whether shops are recommending appropriate work or inflating services." "That'll crater revenues short term," Graham said. "Probably," Amani agreed, "but it'll build trust long term. Right now, we're optimizing for immediate transaction value while destroying customer lifetime value. People come to us once, feel pressured or overcharged, and never return. We need repeat customers who trust us enough to come back and recommend us to others." Carolyn added, "We also need retraining for every manager and mechanic. Not just policy updates, but fundamental culture shift around what good service means. That's a 6-month intensive process minimum, probably longer." Graham turned from the window. "Do it. Draft the new policies, design the training program, and start implementation immediately. What about locations where managers resist?" "We document the resistance and make personnel changes if necessary," Carolyn said. "But we give everyone a genuine chance to adapt first. Most managers are responding to the incentives we created. If we change the incentives, many will adapt. The ones who can't or won't, those are the ones we replace." "How many locations have you assessed now?" "2, with similar findings at both," Amani said. "We need to visit at least 12 more to get comprehensive data, but I'd say these patterns are representative. We're not going to find many locations that are truly excellent. Most will fall somewhere between Brighton's overt abuse and Riverside's subtle pressure." "Then we fix all of them," Graham said with finality.
I'm moving up the press conference to Thursday, 2 days from now. I want to announce concrete changes, not just acknowledge problems. Can you have preliminary recommendations ready by tomorrow afternoon? Amani and Carolyn exchanged glances, both calculating the work required. It'll be rough, Carolyn warned, but yes, we can have a framework ready. They worked until nearly midnight, drafting policy changes and implementation strategies. Amani's apartment became their war room, papers spread across her dying couch, laptops balanced on knees, coffee consumed in quantities that would make sleep impossible even if they'd had time for it. Carolyn proved invaluable, her institutional knowledge filling gaps in Amani's understanding, her HR expertise translating ground-level observations into corporate policy language. This section on mechanic compensation, Carolyn said around 10 p.m., highlighting text on her screen.
You're proposing we eliminate individual commission entirely and move to team-based profit sharing. That's radical. That'll face massive pushback from high performers who currently make substantially more through aggressive upselling. Good, Amani said, too tired to soften her words. Those high performers are the ones creating toxic culture. They're teaching newer mechanics that success means maximizing profit extraction rather than building customer relationships. We need to reward collaboration, quality work, and customer satisfaction, not individual sales prowess. I agree philosophically, but pragmatically, we'll lose some of our top revenue generators. Let them go. They're generating revenue by eroding trust. That's not sustainable. Amani stood, needing to move, to think. Uncle Ray used to say the best mechanics were the ones customers called specifically, who built reputations on honesty. Those mechanics didn't make the most per transaction, but they had customers for life. That's what we should be building, mechanics who become trusted advisors rather than salespeople. Carolyn made notes, then looked up. You realize what you're describing requires completely reimagining automotive service culture, not just Rowan Automotive, but industry-wide. That's much bigger than reforming one company. I know, Amani said quietly, but it has to start somewhere. If we can prove it works, if we can show that honest service is actually more profitable long-term, maybe others will follow. And if they don't, at least we'll have done something right. By the time Carolyn left around midnight, they had a 40-page preliminary framework covering policy changes, incentive restructuring, training requirements, and implementation timeline. Amani collapsed onto her couch, exhausted but unable to sleep, her mind still racing through implications and potential obstacles. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, texting at an hour that suggested he worked late shifts. Word is you're tearing apart every location. Managers are freaking out. Mechanics are hopeful but scared. What's really happening? Amani stared at the message, trying to formulate a response that was honest but not premature. Finally, she typed, "We're trying to fix what's broken, change what's wrong. Make it possible for good mechanics to do good work without compromising. It's going to be messy and some people will hate it, but it's necessary." Marcus's response came quickly. People are taking sides. The ones who've been playing the game are defending status quo. The ones who've been struggling with their conscience are quietly rooting for you. Be careful. The first group has more power. The warning settled heavily. Imani hadn't fully considered the political dimensions, the entrenched interests who benefited from current systems, the managers whose bonuses depended on metrics she was proposing to change, the mechanics who'd built careers on aggressive upselling and wouldn't appreciate being told that success now required different skills. She was threatening livelihoods, not just practices. That made this dangerous in ways she'd been too naive to fully anticipate. Wednesday morning arrived too quickly. Amani showed up at corporate with 4 hours of sleep and coffee as her primary food group. Graham had assembled a small team: Carolyn, the company's general counsel, the VP of operations, and the communications director. They spent 3 hours reviewing the preliminary recommendations, the lawyers flagging legal concerns, the VP of operations warning about implementation challenges, the communications director strategizing how to present this to press and public. The core message, Graham said, is that we're returning to our founding principles. We're acknowledging that growth caused us to lose sight of what made us good in the first place, and we're taking concrete action to fix it. Amani, I want you at the press conference. I want people to see who's driving this change and why.
Is that wise? The communications director asked. She's, no offense, very young and very recently fired. That's going to invite questions about qualifications. That's exactly why I want her there, Graham said firmly. Because she's someone who sacrificed her job rather than compromise her principles, and now she's in position to change the system that punished her for having integrity. That's a powerful story. That's what people need to see, that this isn't just corporate spin, it's genuine reform led by someone with lived experience of what's broken. The communications director looked skeptical but didn't argue further. They spent another hour rehearsing key messages, anticipating difficult questions, preparing Imani for the reality of standing before cameras and reporters who would be looking for any sign of weakness or inauthenticity. They're going to ask about Derek specifically, the communications director warned, about whether he's facing criminal charges, about whether you're filing a wrongful termination suit, about how widespread the problems are. Stay focused on forward-looking solutions, not backward-looking blame. But the blame is relevant, Imani said. People need to understand what happened and why it matters. Agreed, but we want to frame it as, we found problems and we're fixing them, rather than, look how terrible we were. The distinction matters for public perception and legal liability. They broke for lunch, during which Imani discovered she'd become minor news. An article in the industry trade publication about Derek's termination and Rowan Automotive's Cultural Assessment Initiative had gone live that morning. The article quoted anonymous mechanics praising the investigation while managers worried about corporate overreach, an unfair characterization of normal business practices. The comments section was predictably divided. Some people celebrated accountability, sharing their own stories of being overcharged or dismissed at various repair shops. Others accused Rowan Automotive of scapegoating managers for corporate policy failures or suggested the whole thing was performative PR. And running through many comments was skepticism that anything would actually change, cynicism born from years of watching companies announce reforms that quietly disappeared once media attention moved on. Imani read the comments until Carolyn physically took her phone away. Don't torture yourself with internet opinions. Focus on the work. The proof will be in implementation, not in winning over anonymous commenters. Thursday arrived with October rain and the kind of gray skies that matched Imani's nervous energy. The press conference was scheduled for 2 p.m. at corporate headquarters, giving her the entire morning to obsess over everything that could go wrong. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, professional but not corporate, approachable but serious, trying to project competence without seeming like she was pretending to be something she wasn't. Carolyn found her in the bathroom at 1:30, checking her appearance for the 100th time. You look perfect. Stop fussing. I'm about to stand in front of reporters and claim I can fix problems I barely understand. What if they ask something I can't answer? What if I make Graham look foolish for trusting me? Then you say, I don't know, but I'll find out. Honesty is your strength, Imani. Don't abandon it trying to seem more knowledgeable than you are. Carolyn squeezed her shoulder. You're here because you did the right thing when it cost you everything. That's all the qualification you need. Everything else is just details. The press conference room was set up with a podium, microphones, and rows of chairs filled with reporters from local news, industry publications, and the business section of the regional paper. Cameras were positioned strategically, lights adjusted for optimal coverage. Imani felt her stomach clench as she entered with Graham and Carolyn, taking her position slightly behind and to the left of the podium, where Graham would speak first. Graham approached the microphone with the kind of calm that came from years of public speaking, but Imani noticed his hands gripping the podium edge just slightly too tightly. Thank you all for coming. I'm Graham Rowan, CEO of Rowan Automotive Group, and I'm here to discuss a critical situation that has come to my attention regarding practices at several of our locations. He presented the situation methodically: Derek's termination, the investigation's preliminary findings, the decision to conduct comprehensive cultural assessment across all locations. He was careful, measured, acknowledging problems without making promises he couldn't keep. When he reached the part about Imani, his voice warmed with genuine emotion. The person who brought these issues to light is Imani Brooks, a mechanic who was fired from our Brighton location for providing emergency brake service to a customer in need. That customer happened to be my mother, who was dismissed and humiliated by a manager who didn't realize who she was. But that's the point.
Every customer deserves dignity and honest service, regardless of who they are or what they can afford. Ms. Brooks understood that. She risked and lost her job to live that value. And now she's helping us rebuild a culture where doing the right thing is rewarded rather than punished. He stepped aside, gesturing Amani forward. She approached the microphone with her heart hammering, acutely aware of every camera pointed at her, every skeptical expression in the audience. She pulled out her notes. Graham had encouraged her to speak from the heart rather than reading prepared remarks, and set them aside. My name is Amani Brooks. I'm 26 years old. I was fired from Brighton Auto Repair 6 days ago for fixing an elderly woman's brakes without management approval. I'm not going to pretend I'm qualified for this role in traditional ways. I don't have an MBA. I don't have management experience. I don't have corporate credentials. What I have is 14 months of working in a toxic culture where good mechanics were punished for having integrity and vulnerable customers were treated like marks to be exploited. She saw several reporters lean forward, interest sharpening. I know what bad culture looks like because I lived it. I know how managers create environments where people have to choose between doing right and keeping their jobs. And I know that somewhere in the growth of this company, we forgot that our purpose isn't extracting maximum profit from every transaction. It's helping people who depend on their cars to live their lives. Her voice strengthened as she found her rhythm. Over the next several months, I'm going to visit every Rowan automotive location. I'm going to talk with mechanics and customers. I'm going to identify where we're failing people and recommend changes. Some of those changes will be uncomfortable. Some will reduce short-term revenue, but they're necessary if we're going to be the company Robert Rowan intended when he founded this organization, a company that serves people honestly, rather than exploiting their vulnerability. The questions came immediately, rapid fire and probing. A reporter from the business section asked about financial impact. The industry publication asked whether other managers besides Derek had been terminated. A local news anchor asked Amani directly whether she felt qualified for this responsibility. No, Amani answered honestly. I feel terrified and in over my head. But I also know what it's like to watch someone in power choose cruelty over kindness because they can get away with it. I know what it's like to be fired for doing the right thing. And I know that if we wait for someone qualified, who hasn't experienced these problems personally, we'll wait forever. Sometimes the people most qualified to fix broken systems are the ones who've been broken by them. The answer clearly wasn't what the reporter expected. Amani saw surprise flicker across faces, saw some expressions soften from skepticism toward something like respect. She fielded questions for another 20 minutes, sometimes deferring to Graham or Carolyn when they touched on legal or financial specifics, but holding her ground on matters of culture and values. Finally, a young woman from the local community newspaper raised her hand. Ms. Brooks, what would you say to other mechanics watching this who are currently trapped in situations like the one you experienced? Mechanics who see problems but are afraid to speak up? Amani took a breath, thinking about Marcus and Paolo and Big Mike, about Roberto at Riverside, who'd learned to stop pushing back, about 73 people fired for having integrity. I'd say document everything, keep records, build solidarity with coworkers who share your values, and understand that speaking up might cost you, it cost me, but staying silent costs something too. It costs your sense of yourself as someone with principles. At some point, you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be. For me, that moment came when I watched a manager dismiss an elderly woman who was terrified about her failing brakes. I couldn't be the person who walked away from that. The press conference ended with Graham announcing a hotline for customers and employees to report concerns confidentially, promising thorough investigation and genuine reform. As reporters filed out, several approached Amani directly, asking for follow-up interviews, requesting her contact information, clearly seeing her as the human interest angle that would make this story more compelling than standard corporate announcements. Carolyn ran interference, professional and efficient, collecting cards and promising appropriate follow-through while extracting Amani from the crowd. They retreated to Graham's office, where Amani collapsed into a chair with legs that suddenly felt unreliable. You were perfect, Graham said, genuine admiration in his voice. Honest, vulnerable, principled. That line about being broken by the system you're trying to fix, that's going to be the quote everyone uses. That's the narrative that makes this real. rather than just corporate spin. I wasn't trying to create a narrative, Amani said. I was just answering honestly. I know. That's why it worked. Graham pulled up his computer, showing her the first articles already going live. Headlines about automotive industry reform, about whistleblowers leading change, about companies confronting toxic culture. This is going to get attention, national attention probably. That brings opportunity and danger. Opportunity to influence broader industry practices. Danger because we're now committed publicly to promises we have to deliver on. No pressure, Amani said weakly. Massive pressure, Graham corrected, but also resources. I'm authorizing whatever budget you need for this initiative. I'm assigning you a team, Carolyn full-time, plus 3 HR specialists and 2 operations analysts. I'm clearing your schedule of everything except the assessment work. This is now the company's top priority. Amani nodded, trying to process the enormity of what they'd just set in motion. They'd publicly committed to comprehensive reform. They'd made promises about change that would now be scrutinized by media, employees, customers, competitors. They'd painted a target on themselves for anyone invested in maintaining status quo. And somewhere in the 19 locations they hadn't yet assessed, managers were watching and calculating. Mechanics were hoping and worrying. Customers were deciding whether to believe this was real or just another corporate performance that would fade once attention moved elsewhere. The real work was just beginning. The press conference was just announcement. Now came the grinding, exhausting, politically fraught reality of actually changing entrenched systems and challenging powerful people who benefited from things staying exactly as they were. Imani looked at Graham and Carolyn, saw determination mixed with apprehension in their expressions, and understood they were all feeling the same thing. We've started something we have to finish, regardless of how difficult it becomes. Okay, she said, straightening in her chair. Where do we go next? The answer came faster than any of them expected. Within hours of the press conference, the confidential hotline Graham had announced started ringing. The first call came from a customer in Portland who'd been charged $12,200 for transmission work her mechanic neighbor later confirmed was unnecessary. The second came from a mechanic at the Northside location reporting systematic overcharging of Spanish-speaking customers who couldn't easily challenge inflated bills. The third was from an elderly man whose wife had been sold $800 in engine repairs 3 weeks before her car died anyway, the shop refusing refunds despite obvious fraud. By Friday morning, they had 47 calls logged, each one a story of exploitation or abuse, each one evidence that Derek hadn't been an aberration, but a symptom. Carolyn and her expanded team worked through the weekend documenting everything, cross-referencing claims with service records, building cases that were airtight and undeniable. Monday morning, Graham called an emergency executive meeting. Imani sat at the conference table surrounded by regional managers, franchise owners, and corporate leadership, watching faces cycle through shock and denial as the evidence mounted. The VP of Operations went pale when Carolyn presented billing analysis showing systematic fraud at 6 locations. The general counsel took notes with increasing urgency as witness statements revealed patterns that could trigger criminal investigation. Tom Davidson, the manager who'd challenged Imani at the first meeting, finally spoke up. This is cherry-picking worst cases to support a predetermined narrative. Every service business has complaints. Every location has customers who misunderstand pricing or employees with grudges. You can't destroy an entire company culture based on 47 documented cases in 3 days, Graham interrupted, his voice cold. That's not cherry-picking. That's systematic failure. And Tom, I should mention that 5 of those complaints specifically name your location. Want to explain why 3 different customers report being told their brake fluid needed immediate flushing when they'd had it done within the past 6 months? Tom's face flushed. Those were legitimate service recommendations based on what? Brake fluid doesn't degrade that fast. You're either incompetent or fraudulent, and I'm not sure which is worse. Graham stood, his patience clearly exhausted. Here's what's happening effective immediately. Every manager at locations with documented fraud or abuse is suspended pending full investigation. Every employee who filed a complaint or witnessed misconduct is granted full whistleblower protection. And every customer who was overcharged in the past year is being contacted and offered full refunds plus 20% compensation. The room erupted in protests. The CFO warned about financial impact. Franchise owners threatened lawsuits. Regional managers claimed this would destroy morale and operational capacity. Through it all, Graham remained immovable, his expression carved from stone. "I don't care about your objections," he said when the noise finally subsided. "I care about the fact that my mother was treated like garbage at a shop carrying my father's legacy. I care that good mechanics have been fired for having integrity. I care that vulnerable customers have been systematically exploited. All of your concerns about finances and operations and morale are secondary to the fact that we've become exactly what my father spent his life fighting against." He turned to Imani. "You have full authority to suspend, terminate, or restructure management at any location where evidence warrants it. Anyone who interferes with your investigation answers to me personally. Clear?" The message was unmistakable. This wasn't discussion anymore. This was directive. People could adapt or leave, but the old way of operating was over. Over the following weeks, Imani worked 18-hour days visiting locations, conducting interviews, reviewing records, and making recommendations that felt like dismantling and rebuilding simultaneously. She suspended 4 managers, fired 2, and placed another 5 on performance improvement plans with strict oversight. She implemented the new compensation structure despite fierce resistance from high-earning mechanics who'd built careers on aggressive upselling. She personally trained replacement managers on the difference between service recommendation and pressure tactics. The work was exhausting and frequently heartbreaking. At the Westside location, she discovered a mechanic had been systematically reporting safety issues to management for 6 months, only to be fired for creating customer anxiety. At Riverside, she found evidence that Kevin had been keeping 2 sets of books, one showing what customers were actually charged, another showing what corporate was told they were charged, pocketing the difference. At Brighton, Paulo pulled her aside and quietly admitted he'd witnessed Derek accepting cash payments from customers for off-the-books repairs that were never recorded, essentially running a side business using company equipment. Each revelation was another brick in the wall of evidence showing how thoroughly the culture had been corrupted. But there were bright spots, too. Sarah Chen, the manager who'd looked relieved at the first meeting, proved to be running one of the few locations that genuinely prioritize customer satisfaction over revenue maximization. Her mechanics stayed late to finish work properly. Her billing was transparent. Her complaint rate was nearly 0. Imani held Sarah up as the model, bringing other managers to observe her operations and understand what good culture looked like in practice. By late November, 6 weeks after that Thursday night with Mabel's Corolla, the transformation was becoming visible. Customer satisfaction scores climbed steadily as pressure tactics disappeared and honest recommendations replaced aggressive upselling. Employee retention improved as mechanics realized they could do quality work without compromising principles. Revenue dipped initially, exactly as predicted, but then stabilized as repeat business increased and word-of-mouth referrals grew. The media attention continued, with Imani becoming something of an unexpected spokesperson for automotive service reform. She did interviews with NPR, wrote an editorial for the Washington Post, spoke at an industry conference where she challenged other companies to examine their own cultures. The attention was uncomfortable and occasionally overwhelming, but it also created accountability. Every promise they'd made was now public record. Every backslide would be noticed. Not everyone celebrated the changes. 3 franchise owners sued to terminate their agreements, claiming corporate interference violated their contracts. 4 managers quit rather than adapt to new expectations. Tom Davidson was fired after investigation revealed he'd been systematically inflating diagnostic fees and splitting the excess with his service writer. His termination triggered a lawsuit that corporate lawyers assured Graham was frivolous but expensive. Through all of it, Imani kept returning to the fundamental question: were they actually fixing anything, or just rearranging deck chairs while the ship continued sinking? The metrics suggested improvement, but metrics could be gamed. The testimonials were positive, but testimonials were self-selecting. What she needed was unambiguous proof that culture had genuinely shifted. That proof came unexpectedly on a Tuesday afternoon in early December. Imani was at the Brighton location, now under new management, with Paulo promoted to lead mechanic, conducting a follow-up assessment when an elderly woman entered the waiting area, moving slowly with a cane, her coat worn but clean. The new manager, Jennifer, approached with a warm smile. "Good afternoon. How can we help you today?"
The woman explained hesitantly that her car was making a strange noise, that she'd called for an appointment but wasn't sure she had enough money for repairs, that she was worried about being a bother. Jennifer listened patiently, asked clarifying questions, and then said something that made Imani's throat tighten. "Let's get your car up on the lift and take a look. There's no charge for diagnosis, and once we know what's wrong, we'll give you options at different price points. We can also arrange payment plans if needed. You're not a bother. Helping people with car trouble is literally why we're here." The woman's relief was visible, her shoulders dropping from defensive tension. Jennifer personally walked her to the service bay, introduced her to Paolo, and stayed while he conducted the initial inspection. 20 minutes later, Paolo determined the noise was a loose heat shield, a 5-minute fix requiring no parts, something he could resolve immediately at no charge. "You're sure?" the woman asked, clearly expecting a catch. "There's nothing else wrong?" "Your car's in good shape," Paolo assured her. "Whoever's been maintaining it has done well. The heat shield probably loosened from road vibration. Happens sometimes. I'll tighten it up right now. You'll be good to go." "How much will that cost?" "Nothing. It takes 5 minutes and no parts. We're not going to charge you for tightening a bolt." The woman started crying, not the devastated tears Mabel had shed, but tears of relief and gratitude. "I went to 2 other shops this week. One told me I needed new exhaust for $600. The other said my catalytic converter was failing, $12,200 minimum. I've been so worried about how I'd pay for it." Paolo's expression darkened. "Do you have the estimates from those shops?" She did. Jennifer reviewed them with barely contained anger, then said quietly, "Ma'am, those shops lied to you. Your exhaust is fine. Your catalytic converter is fine. They saw someone vulnerable and tried to exploit you. That's not okay. And if you want to file complaints with the Better Business Bureau, I'll help you do it right now." Imani watched this entire interaction from across the service bay, something fierce and proud expanding in her chest. This was it. This was proof. Jennifer hadn't known Imani was watching. Paolo hadn't been performing for corporate assessment. They'd simply seen someone who needed help and helped her, then got angry on her behalf when they discovered she'd been targeted by predatory shops. The culture was changing, not just in policy, but in instinct, in the automatic response to vulnerability being compassion rather than exploitation. After the woman left, still tearful, refusing Paolo's offer to write down the names of the dishonest shops because she just wanted to forget the whole stressful experience, Imani approached Jennifer and Paolo. "That was exactly right," she said quietly. "That's exactly what we're trying to build." "It's just decent human behavior," Jennifer said, looking uncomfortable with praise. "I don't understand how anyone operates differently." "Derek operated differently for years," Paolo reminded her. "We all watched him do it. Some of us—" He stopped, guilt flickering across his face. "Some of us didn't push back hard enough because we needed our jobs." "So that's why systemic change matters," Imani said. "Individual integrity is important, but if the system punishes integrity, good people end up compromising or leaving. We're trying to build a system that rewards what you just did, seeing someone vulnerable and helping them rather than exploiting them." She filed her report that evening with growing confidence. Brighton wasn't perfect, but it was fundamentally different from what it had been. The transformation was real, measurable, and sustained. If they could change Brighton, Derek's location, the epicenter of everything wrong, they could change anywhere. Graham read her report and scheduled another company-wide meeting for the following Monday. This time, the atmosphere was different. Managers who'd survived the investigations looked cautiously hopeful rather than defensive. Mechanics who'd been promoted into leadership roles sat straighter, their body language broadcasting tentative ownership. Even the franchise owners who'd initially threatened lawsuits seemed willing to give the new approach a chance. 6 weeks ago, Graham began, we acknowledged that this company had lost its way. We'd become so focused on revenue and growth that we forgot why we existed, to provide honest, quality service to people who depend on their vehicles. Today, I'm here to share that we're seeing genuine improvement. He pulled up metrics showing customer satisfaction increases, retention improvements, and perhaps most tellingly, a massive reduction in complaints. These numbers matter, but they're not the whole story. The real story is in the calls we're getting now. Customers telling us they finally trust an auto repair shop, mechanics telling us they can do quality work without compromising, employees saying they're proud to work here again. That's what success looks like. He gestured to Amani. None of this happens without Amani Brooks having the courage to help my mother despite knowing it would cost her job. None of this happens without mechanics like Paolo and Sarah and Roberto choosing to tell the truth about what was wrong even when it risked their positions. None of this happens without all of you being willing to change how you've done things for years. That's hard. That's uncomfortable. And I'm grateful to everyone who's been willing to do it. The meeting continued with Imani presenting the new training program they'd developed, comprehensive modules on customer communication, ethical decision-making, and technical excellence. Every mechanic and manager would go through it over the next quarter. Every location would be assessed quarterly against the new standards. Every employee would have direct access to an ombudsperson if they witnessed problems or felt pressured to compromise. As people filed out, Sarah Chen approached Imani with a shy smile. I just wanted to say thank you. I've been trying to run my shop the right way for years, but I always felt like I was fighting against corporate priorities. Now it feels like corporate is finally supporting what I've been trying to do. You were always doing it right, Imani told her. We just had to catch up to you. The following week brought unexpected developments. Two of the franchise owners who'd sued to terminate their agreements called to withdraw their lawsuits, saying they'd reviewed the new policies and wanted to align with them instead. A competitor company reached out asking if Rowan Automotive would consult on their cultural reform, having watched the media coverage and recognized similar problems in their own organization. And perhaps most satisfyingly, Marcus called to tell her that Rodriguez Auto, now Martinez Auto, had implemented similar compensation changes after watching what Rowan was doing. You're changing the industry, Marcus told her. Other shops are watching, seeing that honest service can actually be profitable, seeing that treating mechanics well improves work quality. You started a movement, Brooks. The praise felt uncomfortable and too large, but Imani couldn't deny the evidence. Industry publications were writing about the Rowan model of automotive service. Other companies were announcing their own cultural assessments. Mechanics were sharing the story on social media, using it to pressure their own employers for change. One act of kindness, one decision to fix an elderly woman's brakes, despite the personal cost, had catalyzed transformation extending far beyond anything Imani had imagined possible. December brought the company holiday party, which Graham had restructured from the usual corporate affair into a genuine celebration of the mechanics, service writers, and support staff who actually did the work. Instead of a fancy hotel ballroom, he rented an event space and invited everyone from mechanics to corporate leadership. No hierarchy, no special sections for executives. Mabel attended as guest of honor, still moving carefully but with obvious pride. She found Imani near the refreshment table and embraced her warmly. Look at what you've built, honey. Look at what you've changed. I just fixed your brakes, Imani said, deflecting. You fixed much more than that. Mabel's eyes were bright with emotion. You reminded everyone what really matters. You gave my son back his father's company, not the business, the values. Robert would be so proud. Graham joined them, overhearing the last part. Dad would be proud of both of you. Mom for testing whether we'd lost our souls, Imani for proving we hadn't completely. He raised his glass. To the people who remind us why we do this work. Others joined the toast, and soon Imani was surrounded by mechanics thanking her, managers admitting they'd been wrong to resist changes, customers sharing stories of positive experiences they'd had recently. The attention was overwhelming, but Paolo rescued her, pulling her aside to a quieter corner. You know what's wild? He said. 6 months ago, I was keeping my head down, following Derek's orders, trying not to think too hard about what we were doing wrong. Now I'm lead mechanic, I'm training new hires on ethical service, and I actually look forward to coming to work. You did that. We all did it, Imani corrected. You spoke up when I needed support. Big Mike created cover while I fixed Mabel's car. Marcus provided parts. Sarah showed us what good management looked like. This was never about one person. Maybe, Paolo conceded. But you were the one willing to get fired for it. That's what made the difference. Someone finally saying the emperor had no clothes, consequences be damned. The evening continued with music and food,
and the kind of genuine camaraderie that emerges when people stop competing and start collaborating. Amani found herself talking with mechanics from different locations, hearing about their experiences with the changes, their hopes for continued improvement, their appreciation for finally feeling valued. Late in the evening, Graham found her again. "Can we talk in my office for a minute?" They walked through the quiet corporate building, their footsteps echoing in empty hallways. Graham's office looked different at night, the city lights below creating patterns across his desk, the family photos cast in shadow. He pulled out a file folder and handed it to her. "What's this?" Amani asked. "Your official promotion. You've been operating as regional service advisor, but that was always temporary until we figured out what role you should actually have." Graham smiled slightly. "I'm creating a new position, Vice President of Service Culture and Standards. You'll oversee all quality and ethics initiatives across the organization, report directly to me, and have authority to implement changes as you see fit. Salary is $120,000 plus bonuses tied to customer satisfaction metrics and employee retention. I need someone who will never let us forget why we do this work. That's you." Amani stared at the paperwork, her mind struggling to process. 6 months ago, she'd been making $21 an hour and facing eviction. Now she was being offered a VP position with a salary that would transform her life. It felt impossible, like a dream she'd wake from, to discover she was still sleeping on her dying couch with an orange eviction notice on her door. "Graham, I don't know if I'm qualified." "You're the most qualified person I know," he interrupted. "Not because of credentials or experience, but because you understand fundamentally that businesses exist to serve people. That's rarer than you think, especially in leadership. Most executives spend their careers learning to see customers as revenue streams and employees as resources. You never learn to see people that way. That makes you invaluable." "Can I think about it?" Amani asked, though she already knew her answer. "Take all the time you need, but Amani, I hope you say yes, because we're not done yet. We've reformed Rowan Automotive, but the industry is bigger than us. I want to create an industry-wide certification program for ethical service. I want to establish a nonprofit that trains mechanics in customer communication and ethical decision-making. I want to change how automotive service works nationally, and I need your help doing it." The vision he described was enormous, ambitious to the point of seeming impossible. But then again, fixing a stranger's brakes had seemed like a simple act that couldn't possibly matter beyond one evening. And look what it had become. "Yes," Amani said. "I don't need time to think. Yes." She called her brother that night from her apartment, no longer threatened with eviction, finally furnished properly, the eviction notice framed on her wall as a reminder of how quickly circumstances could change. Terrence whooped so loudly she had to hold the phone away from her ear. "VP! My sister is a VP! Do you know how incredible this is?" "I'm terrified," Amani admitted. "This is so much bigger than anything I imagined doing." "You fixed an old lady's brakes and accidentally reformed an entire company," Terrence said. "I think you can handle being a VP." She called her mother next, who cried and prayed and thanked her for staying true to the values she'd been taught. "Your daddy would be so proud, baby. Uncle Ray would be so proud. You made something good come from having the courage to do right when it was hard." That night, Amani pulled out the notebook where she'd been documenting everything since that Thursday with Mabel. She read through her own words, the fear and uncertainty, the anger at injustice, the determination to change systems that hurt vulnerable people. She'd started this journey as a fired mechanic with $43 in her checking account and no idea what came next. Now she was a VP with authority to shape industry standards, with resources to create lasting change, with a platform to amplify voices that had been systematically silenced. The transformation felt surreal, but it had started with something simple, seeing someone who needed help and choosing to help them, even when it cost everything. That choice had revealed character, not just hers, but Derek's, Graham's, Mabel's, every mechanic who'd had to decide between principles and paychecks. And in revealing that character, it had created the conditions for transformation. 3 months later, Amani stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. at the National Automotive Service Conference, addressing an audience of shop owners, mechanics, and industry leaders. She'd been invited to present the keynote on ethical service culture, and the room was packed far beyond capacity. I want to tell you about the night I got fired, she began, and told Mabel's story, the shaking hands, the dangerous breaks, Derek's contempt, the choice she'd made. The audience was silent, captivated. I thought that was the end. I thought I'd thrown away my career for one elderly woman's brake job. I was wrong. It was the beginning of reform at Rowan Automotive, of changing industry conversations, of proving that honest service isn't just ethical, it's profitable. She presented the data they'd compiled over 6 months. Customer retention up 43%, employee turnover down 62%, revenue growth stabilizing at sustainable levels despite eliminating aggressive upselling. Treating people with dignity works. Paying mechanics fairly works. Building trust works. These aren't radical concepts, they're basic business fundamentals that somehow got lost when we decided growth mattered more than integrity. After her presentation, shop owners swarmed her with questions. Mechanics thanked her for validating what they'd always believed. Industry leaders wanted to discuss consultation partnerships. The movement Graham had envisioned was taking shape, spreading beyond Rowan Automotive into the broader industry consciousness. That evening, Imani returned to her hotel room and found a voicemail from an unknown number. She played it back. Miss Brooks, this is Janet Torres. You don't know me, but I wanted to call and say thank you. I'm a single mother of 3, and last week my car broke down on the way to work. I took it to a Rowan Automotive location because I'd read about your reforms. The mechanic found that my alternator was failing. Exactly the problem you once weren't allowed to tell a customer about. And the manager worked with me on a payment plan I could actually afford. Because of that, I didn't lose my job, my kids got to school, and I didn't have to choose between car repairs and groceries. I know you'll never read most of the thank you messages you get, but I needed you to know that what you did matters to people like me. Thank you for caring about whether we can afford to survive. Imani saved the message, added it to the collection she'd been building of similar stories, customers who'd been treated honestly, mechanics who'd been empowered to do quality work, families whose lives were tangibly better because one company had decided to operate differently. These stories were the real measure of success, more than metrics or industry recognition. A year after that Thursday night, Rowan Automotive held a ceremony at Brighton Auto Repair to commemorate the transformation. They'd renamed the location the Robert Rowan Community Service Center, dedicating it specifically to serving low-income customers with transparent pricing and flexible payment options. Mabel cut the ribbon, Graham spoke about his father's legacy, and Imani stood beside them, still slightly overwhelmed by how one decision had cascaded into industry-wide change. But the moment that mattered most came afterward, when an elderly man approached Imani hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Imani Brooks?" "Yes, sir." "I just wanted to shake your hand. My wife passed away 2 years ago from complications after heat stroke. Her car broke down on the highway, and she couldn't afford the repairs, so she tried to drive it to a cheaper shop. The engine seized, and she sat in 100-degree heat for hours." His voice wavered. "I heard your story. About fixing brake without payment. About the woman who couldn't afford repairs. And I needed you to know that what you're doing matters. That if someone like you had been at the shop where my wife went, maybe she'd still be alive." Imani embraced him as he cried. This stranger united with her by the shared understanding that car repairs weren't just transactions. They were life and death for people operating on the edge of survival. Every time someone was dismissed or exploited or turned away, there were consequences that rippled far beyond inconvenience. Marcus found her later, still processing the encounter. "You okay?" "I'm thinking about all the people we didn't save," Imani said quietly. "All the ones who got turned away before we changed things. All the Mabels who didn't get help. All the wives who broke down in dangerous situations. All the people who were exploited because they were vulnerable." "You can't save everyone," Marcus said gently. "But you're saving the ones you can reach going forward. That's not nothing." He was right, but the weight of all those unmeasured tragedies still pressed heavily. This was the burden of having power to change systems, recognizing how much harm had been done before the change, how many people had suffered unnecessarily because of choices that prioritized profit over humanity. But there was hope too. Rowan Automotive wasn't perfect, but it was fundamentally different. The industry was paying attention, implementing reforms, beginning to question whether aggressive upselling and predatory pricing were actually necessary for profitability. Mechanics like Paolo were being promoted into leadership, bringing ground-level wisdom into decision-making. Customers were learning they could trust certain shops, could advocate for themselves without fear of retaliation. Change was possible, slow, difficult, requiring constant vigilance, but possible. 2 years after that Thursday night, Imani returned to her old apartment building. She'd moved to a much nicer place, but nostalgia brought her back occasionally. The eviction notice was long gone from her door, replaced by a new tenant's welcome mat. She stood in the hallway, remembering who she'd been, terrified, desperate, facing eviction and unemployment with no clear path forward. That person had made a choice based purely on principle, with no expectation of reward or recognition. She'd seen someone who needed help and helped them, accepting the cost because the alternative was becoming someone she couldn't respect. That choice had changed everything. Not immediately, not obviously, but with the kind of cascading impact that only became visible in retrospect. One decision had led to another, had revealed character and created opportunities, had demonstrated that integrity could survive in systems designed to punish it. Imani pulled out her phone and called Mabel, something she did every few weeks now. They'd become genuinely close, this elderly widow and the young mechanic whose lives had intersected in a moment of crisis. "How are you, honey?" Mabel's voice was warm, familiar. "I'm good. Just thinking about that Thursday night, how scared I was, how certain I was that I'd destroyed my life." "And instead you saved mine and reformed an industry," Mabel said with gentle amusement. "Funny how these things work. I just fixed your brakes." "You did much more than that, Imani. You reminded everyone that people matter more than profit. That's a gift. That's a legacy." After they hung up, Imani drove to Brighton Auto Repair, the Robert Rowan Community Service Center. She parked and watched mechanics working in the service bays, observed customers being treated with respect and patience, saw managers prioritizing quality over speed. This place that had once represented everything wrong with the industry was now a model for what it could be. Graham had asked her recently what success looked like, how they'd know when they'd truly fixed what was broken. She'd thought about it for a long time before answering. Success is when doing the right thing stops feeling exceptional. When treating customers honestly is just standard practice. When mechanics can have integrity without risking their jobs. When vulnerable people can ask for help without fear of exploitation. That's success. They weren't there yet. Probably never would be completely. Systems required constant maintenance, cultures drifted without vigilance, the pressure to prioritize profit over people was eternal. But they were closer than they'd been. Measurably, demonstrably closer. And it had started with one person choosing to help a stranger whose brakes were failing, even when that choice cost everything. It had started with Mabel testing whether her late husband's company still had a soul. It had started with Graham being willing to listen when his mother told him what she'd discovered. It had started with a series of small decisions that, when combined, had created transformation extending far beyond anything any individual could have engineered alone. Imani sat in her car for a long time, watching the shop operate, thinking about the man whose wife had died from heat stroke, and the woman named Janet who'd been able to keep her job, and the countless others whose lives were tangibly different because systems had changed. This was what success looked like. Not perfection, but progress. Not complete victory, but meaningful movement toward a world where people mattered more than profits. She thought about Uncle Ray teaching her that good mechanics take care of people, not just cars. About her mother insisting that dignity came from how you treated others when you had power over them. About the night she'd stood in Brighton Auto Repair's parking lot with $43 in her checking account, and a decision that would define everything that followed. She'd chosen correctly. Not because it had worked out, though it had, beyond her wildest imaginings, but because it had been right. Because some choices matter independent of outcome. Because character is revealed in moments when integrity costs everything. Because the person you become is determined by the decisions you make when no one's watching and nothing's guaranteed. Imani started her car and drove toward corporate headquarters, toward the office where she now worked to ensure that others wouldn't have to make the choice she'd made, wouldn't have to choose between principles and survival, between helping vulnerable people and keeping their jobs. She drove toward the future she was helping build, where good mechanics could do good work without compromise, where customers could trust that they'd be treated fairly, where an elderly woman with failing brakes would never again be dismissed as inconvenient. The road ahead was long, the work never truly finished. But for the first time in her life, Amani felt like she was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. And it all traced back to one Thursday evening, one elderly woman, one failed brake system, and the simple decision to help someone who needed it, regardless of cost. That decision had changed one company, influenced an industry, and proved that integrity could not only survive but thrive when people chose courage over comfort. It had proven that Derek's way, the exploitation, the cruelty, the systematic dehumanization, wasn't inevitable or necessary. It had proven that another way was possible, and that possibility, once demonstrated, could never be completely extinguished. It would live in every mechanic who chose honesty, every manager who prioritized people over profit, every customer who was treated with dignity rather than exploited for vulnerability. It would live in the systems they'd reformed, and the culture they'd rebuilt, and the industry conversations they'd changed. One act of kindness, one moment of courage, one person refusing to be complicit in suffering she had the power to prevent. That was how change happened, not through grand gestures or corporate initiatives, but through individual choices that accumulated and cascaded and eventually transformed the landscape entirely. One brake job at a time, one honest interaction at a time, one decision to do right at a time. Amani parked in her reserved spot, still weird, still uncomfortable with the privilege, and headed into the building where she now shaped policy and culture. Tomorrow she'd visit another location, ask more questions, identify more problems, recommend more changes. She'd continue the work that had begun that Thursday night and would continue for as long as systems needed defending and people needed protecting. But tonight, driving through the city where her life had transformed so dramatically, Amani allowed herself a moment of pure gratitude. Gratitude for Mabel's courage in testing her late husband's company. Gratitude for Graham's willingness to listen and act. Gratitude for mechanics like Paolo and Marcus who'd supported her when it mattered. Gratitude for the opportunity to do work that actually mattered, that made people's lives tangibly better, that proved businesses could serve rather than exploit. And gratitude for the scared, desperate mechanic she'd been that Thursday night, who'd made one decision based purely on principle and accidentally changed everything. That mechanic lived on in every choice Amani made now, in every policy she recommended, in every conversation she had with managers who needed to remember that the numbers on their spreadsheets represented actual people with actual needs and actual dignity that deserved protection. She would never forget what it felt like to be powerless, to be fired for doing right, to have $43 between herself and disaster. That memory was her compass, keeping her focused on what actually mattered when corporate pressures tried to blur the lines between service and exploitation. And as long as she remembered, as long as she kept that Thursday night present in her consciousness, Derek's way would never return. The cruelty, the dismissiveness, the systematic dehumanization of vulnerable people would never again be acceptable at Rowan Automotive or anywhere else she had influence. One brake job, one elderly woman, one moment of choosing principle over security. That was all it took to prove that another world was possible. And once proven possible, it became inevitable, slow, difficult, requiring constant vigilance, but inevitable nonetheless. Because people had seen it now, had witnessed what happened when someone chose integrity over survival, when systems reformed around principles rather than profit maximization, when vulnerable people were treated with dignity rather than exploited. And having seen it, they couldn't unsee it, couldn't pretend the Derek Harlans of the world were acceptable anymore, couldn't accept that aggressive upselling and predatory pricing were just business realities that couldn't be changed. Change had come. Not complete, not permanent without maintenance, but real and measurable and spreading. All because of one person who'd looked at an elderly woman shaking hands and dangerous brakes and decided that keeping a job wasn't worth watching someone die. All because Amani Brooks had been exactly who she was when it mattered most. And that ultimately was the story worth telling, not about corporate reform or industry transformation, but about the moment when one person's character revealed itself in crisis and catalyzed everything that followed. That moment lived on, echoing forward into every positive change, every honest interaction, every time someone chose humanity over profit. That moment was why this story mattered, Why Amani's journey from fired mechanic to VP of Service Culture and Standards mattered. Why Mabel's test of her late husband's legacy mattered. Because it proved that one person doing one right thing could change the entire world. One break job at a time.